called to order. First order of business, I will read the new Indigenous Solidarity Statement for the first time. So we'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is on the unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganyan-Gehaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with the Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So second point on the agenda is roll call, and I have a few requests for excusal. I'll entertain that in a moment, starting with Asma and Omar, who couldn't be here today as they're at a CSU event that they're organizing, as well as Peter, who has to leave early. Yes, Veronica?
Yes, I'd like to move to excuse Gabby and Layla from last week's special council meeting.
All right, that is good. Okay, so we have a motion on the table to excuse Gabby and Layla from last week's meeting, seconded by Ali. Is there any discussion? Okay, so yes, Ahmed? Okay, is that the amendment be considered friendly? Okay, so the motion on the table is to excuse Gabby, Layla, and Ahmed from last week's special council meeting. So if there's no discussion to be had, all those in favor, oh, yes, sorry, Kemi? Pardon?
Can I be excused for that special council?
It's only executives who need to.
Oh, okay, fine.
So all those in favor, please raise your placards.
Here's one in the front.
17, all those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 0. Before we go any further, I just need to mention that the Concordian is going to be taking pictures, so if there's anyone who would not like to appear in any of the pictures that could be in the student press, please raise your hands and it will be noted. All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Noted. Perfect. Moving on, like I said, for this meeting I have requests for excusal from Asma and Omar, who are organizing an event, as well as Peter, who has to leave early. So it's up to council if they'd like to excuse or not. Yes, Jared? Okay, do we have a second? Awizif, sorry, comes to your placard. Right. Is there any discussion to be had on excusals? Okay, so all those in favor, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 0. Alright, so that carries. Alright, so this brings us to approval of the agenda. So anything that needs to be modified, amended, removed, all that, go ahead now, Devin.
I would like to add one point to the agenda, gifts.
Alright. Is it a substantive? A motion?
Yes.
Okay. So, gifts?
No. Information. No.
Informational. Okay.
Thank you.
Under informational. Yes, Rory?
I want to add 8B ACSD, and I want to add 8C University's financial statements.
ACSD. Right. Yes, Rowan?
Two things. I have FASA to new business substantive, as well as can I add executive roles to new business informational?
So is FASA and executive roles?
Yep. Substantive and informational.
Okay. FASA in substantive and executive roles in informational, correct?
Sorry?
FASA in substantive and, okay, just making sure I got that right. Moving along, yes, Layla?
Gender Advocacy Committee to substantive.
Okay. Moving along, yes, Ro?
Sorry, just would it be possible for FASA to go earlier, just because that way they don't have to sit through the entire meeting before they?
Okay, is it a motion attached to it?
I believe.
Or is
Yes,
it
there is.
a presentation? Okay. I understood it's a presentation, but since we have externals, is everyone okay with FASA being first since we have people coming from the outside? Perfect. Kemi? Ali, I know you have one.
Yeah, closed session.
Okay.
Yeah.
Investment manager?
Doesn't matter, honestly. Yeah. Can we have it after the presentation?
Yeah. All right. Is there anything else to be added, amended, modified, removed before we move to a vote? Okay, going once. Perfect. Okay, so we just need a motion to approve the agenda and all items under consent. Yes, Joe?
I move to approve the agenda and all items under consent.
Perfect. Seconded by Patrick. All right, so I presume there's no discussion. All those in favor, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 0. All right, so if you'll afford me 2 minutes, I will modify this and upload it to the Facebook group. In the meantime, there is some sustenance in the corner. The agenda has been uploaded to the Facebook group. And I have checked and double checked that everything is correct. So with that, we can move on to appointments, beginning with 6A, AVEC committees. And Ahmed, I believe this is yours.
So again, AVEC is the Provincial Student Association, that's CCU's core group. There's 2 working groups. One, it's accessible education, and the second one, it's climate justice. There is no cap, so anyone is welcome to join them. If you have any questions.
So as you all remember, the 2 working groups, accessible education and, sorry, what was the other one? Climate justice. All right, so if anyone would like to nominate themselves to either of those working groups, not, it'll come back again at the next meeting. All right, so if there's no one who wants to appoint themselves, okay, so this will come back again in April. So with that, we can move on to 6B, which is CCSL, and Layla, this one's yours.
So the CCSL is the Concordia Council on Student Life. It approves a lot of funding for different types of events or activities that different student groups propose. It's a really interesting committee. You get to find out a lot about what other students are doing on campus, and it funds larger initiatives. Most recently, one of their really large fundings went to Waste Not Want Not, which is something the CSU also voted to fund at a council meeting. They meet Friday mornings at 10, about once a month, and alternate between the downtown and Loyola campuses.
Is there anyone who would like to nominate themselves to the Concordia Council on Student Life? Right, going once. All right, so if there are no nominations, that may or may not come back at the next meeting, as it's not required to. Okay, so with that, we can move on to 7A, which is FASA. And Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Great. I'm actually going to let do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Hello everyone, I'm the General Coordinator for FASA, if you don't know me already. Some of you may be aware of this issue, some of you may not. Recently, with the postering for the CSU elections, many posters were taken down in the VA building, specifically the Fine Arts building, including many posters of student-initiated events along with the Art Matters events, which we have some materials here to show you. Not only is a financial burden on these events in terms of publicity and including FASA events, which is actually a collaboration with the CSU, funnily enough, many of those posters were taken down as well. Also, many of these posters were silk screened by hand and tossed directly into the garbage by Nicholas Roberts, the CEO, and his electoral team. So we're here to seek a motion being passed. This is an issue that dates back to 2015 with FASA bringing it to council multiple times to have FASA be contacted by the CEO before postering these events. And multiple agreements were made. Nothing has been officially motioned, so we'd like to bring that today and also request some damages for the Art Matters Festival, which has also written a statement that we are hoping to read out to you to be heard out.
So just
sorry, I just want to add one more thing. Also, I contacted all the CSU executives directly. Obviously, they can't be completely involved in the election process. We also contacted the CEO. I contacted Omar by phone and email, and I didn't get any response. Layla is the only coordinator at this time who has gone back to us on the issue. Nicholas Roberts' emails to us were incredibly condescending, so that's a big part of the reason why we decided to come in today.
So yeah, I'm Jeremy. For those that don't know me, I've been around for a long time. I've sat on CSU and I've been involved with FASA. So since 2015, 2014, I've been here talking about postering. Each time agreements are made, but nothing is followed through. We don't feel it's our responsibility to contact the CSU every time they want to put up their election posters because we don't know exactly when that happens. The postering is the acknowledgement that that time has happened. So yeah, I'm going to read out the letter from Art Matters and then I'll talk more and then answer questions. So, dear CSU coordinators, CSU Chief Electoral Officer, and Council, seeing as FASA has already responded to you directly concerning your offensive postering practices, we will keep this letter short and to the point. In order for the CSU to offer appropriate compensation for the loss of Art Matters posters, it is important that you understand exactly what it is you destroyed in the first place. Given your offer to reprint 20 posters on Art Matters' behalf, it is clear that you do not, in fact, understand what was lost when you took down Art Matters posters and replaced them with CSU election posters. Each Art Matters poster was not only digitally printed, but additionally screen printed. Screen printing is a process that cannot be done by a Xerox machine or even at most professional print shops. An artist treated each poster individually to achieve the unique effect imagined by our graphic designer. As a process that is both expensive and labor intensive, screen printing provided our posters with a truly significant quality that reflected the vision and talent of our graphic designer and communicated our organization's project as a whole. Was truly disheartening to learn that despite all our efforts and intentions behind them, our posters had still been thoughtlessly discarded by the CSU. When FASA stated in their own letter by removing the Art Matters posters, the CSU had also destroyed art, they were not exaggerating. Beyond any potential financial hit Art Matters may have taken due to the loss of our posters, it is important that the CSU understands that its behavior was fundamentally and without exception entirely disrespectful. The number of students who are directly involved in the festival, as coordinators, curators, artists, volunteers, board members, technicians, editors, translators, etc., now exceeds 200. Those posters were created to promote them and the work that they have dedicated to the festival. What does it mean when a representative of the CSU takes one of those posters and throws it in the garbage? What does it say of the CSU's opinion of the Concordia fine arts community in general? This year's festival is only at its halfway point, and our events have already been attended by over 1,000 people. Art Matters is a vital part of the fine arts community as well as the Concordia community at large, and how a representative of the CSU was either oblivious to the fact or simply did not care needs to be explained. It is with regret that we cannot attend your council meeting to speak with you on this issue. While we extend our thanks to FASA for defending our interests, we the Art Matters coordinators, and thereby Art Matters Festival in itself remain faceless to you. It is our fear that regardless of how many emails exchanged and letters written, the CSU's inability to put our face or meaning to our organizations is ultimately what has and will continue to motivate such disrespectfulness and intensive practices such as the destruction of our promotional materials. With all being said, the Art Matters Festival continues to take place during the month of March. All our events are open to the public. However, we would like to extend a special invitation to the coordinator, CEO, and the CSU. We would love to meet with you and introduce you to some of the many students who make the festival possible. We can share a drink together and celebrate the immense talents of the Concordia artistic community. Regards, Jordan, Diana, and Mattia from Art Matters.
And it should be noted as well that a lot of the posters, other than the Art Matters posters and the FASA specific posters that were taken down, were also, like I mentioned, student-initiated projects that FASA was funding. So if you've heard of our special project grants, these are grants that are awarded to students. They go through a whole jurying process to get funding for these posters, and they can't financially compensate for them themselves. And those posters that we had supplied them with the funding for were also ripped down.
So the main issue in our eyes is the CSU is under the impression that they own all the bulletin boards on campus. This is false. The CSU does not own these bulletin boards. They do belong to the university. The university has a poster policy outlining how posters should be treated. FASA, ASFA, CASA, the ECA, the GSA, and the CSU all have the ability and authority to stamp posters on campus for any building at Concordia, even at Loyola. And when elections comes times, they disregard this authority and just take down our posters of all the projects that we funded.
We also, I should acknowledge as well that we understand that the CSU elections are a very important time for the CSU, but it also should be noted that this is a time when FASA would normally also be having our election. The reason we're not right now is because we're getting a new pay policy passed at our next general meeting for the coordinator team, but normally this would be the same time as Art Matters and the same time as the elections for FASA. So we also need that space on the bulletin boards to advertise.
So there's a poster going around of stuff that has been screen printed. We also have the publications if you want to take a look at those, just so you can understand what the Art Matters Festival is and how it is a very important tool for all undergraduate students within the Fine Arts program.
And this is an underlying issue, but I just want to bring up that in my eyes, it's incredibly wasteful to print excessive posters and then just put up a ton of the exact same poster multiple times to cover an entire bulletin board. I don't think it necessarily makes a student more likely to want to nominate themselves to see the same poster 10, 20 times. I think it's just a waste of paper. So I think it's something to think about, as I know CSU tries to take steps to be a more sustainable union.
So maybe before we get into our motion, we can answer questions or elaborate more if you want.
Just before we get into that, I just want to remind everyone, I can see that there's some strong feelings on the issue, but we're here to discuss what the FAFSA representatives brought, so that's not anyone's individual gripes with the CEO, anyone's issues with elections or anything like that. It's just what was brought to council today. And also thank you very much for coming here and bringing this to council as well. So I have a bit of a speakers list of Rory, Patrick, and Peter. And the floor is yours.
Yeah, sorry, just a little point of information first off of your comment. I'm not sure I understand. If there are issues that arise because of what FAFSA has brought forward, like questioning the DEO or the CEOs, can we not, this is relevant to the agenda point, can we not also discuss that?
Oh, no, absolutely. I just mean gripes that don't have to do with the issues at hand. So like, for example, I'm not happy with the CEO because they did something during my campaign. That's
unrelated.
Unrelated, yes.
Okay.
So just things that are related to the issues brought
So
up.
to clarify, I can now use my speaking privileges to gripe about our own DEOs and CEOs, right?
If it relates to
Yes,
the point,
okay.
yes.
So, I have a few questions, if maybe we can just machine gun this. Specifically, you're saying that Nicholas Roberts tore down the posters?
Nicholas Roberts and the people, anyone else that he had hired to help him poster the university.
DEOs.
Yeah. To clarify as well, while he did tear down the majority of the posters, he also tacked posters at the very bottom of bulletin boards. So there was like maybe 20 or 30 posters overlapping each other at the bottom of bulletin boards. So while technically not removed, they're there lying on the ground. But
removed though.
But a lot were just removed as well.
And this is specifically on the, on bulletin boards that are attached to the wall that are the normal bulletin boards used by all the student groups,
Yes.
not the rolling bulletin boards that are moved into the lobbies for the purpose of elections.
No, we don't, and actually I don't think we have any of those in the VA right now. So it's just the bulletin boards that are already on the wall that exist year round.
Okay. And none of this tearing down was done by candidates in the elections. It was by the electoral officers.
As far as we know, he's told us that he's done it, so as far as we know that it was him and his team.
Are you able to provide us with the email responses from the CEO and DEO? Because I think as the official, he is CSU's official representative for the elections. If he has responded to you with an official response, I, at the very least, as a counselor, would like to see that so that we can, censure or caution him. But we can't do that without a complete picture. And I guess he's not here today to respond or to answer questions about it. But I think that's the next sort of course of action is if he's gone and torn these down, I know we're discussing damages or reparations made for you guys, but I think this issue is also what do we do about this behavior? Because it can't be, we can't just fix it and then not prevent it or not say that it was wrong in the first place.
We have the emails with us today. If you want, I would be happy to read out his response, his initial response to us immediately after asking him about it.
We have a bit of the speakers list. So just to keep things short and sweet, if we could, I see there's a lot of questions coming up, so if we could just limit it to 2 questions per person, and if we could just keep the CEO as they, so that we don't misgender our colleagues, that would be excellent as well. Patrick?
Well, the question that I want to know, the way the comment that Nate made about the agreement that CSU and FAFSA, is there any proof of document proof that written proof because there isn't any proof, they cannot really complain about it because it's mostly verbal, and you have to have more written proof, like a document showing that we agreed on doing this, we agreed on doing that, but cannot do this. Verbal is in a sense, in a way, you have to have more written proof that you have that agreement between the two.
Sorry, I know the acoustics aren't great. Did you catch that in the back? No. Okay. The question was just on if, allow me to interpret if I understood correctly, just about written proof instead of hearsay in terms of the CEO's actions, or if there was any.
Yeah, we have to email.
Okay,
That's why I want
perfect.
to
Yeah.
email.
They confirmed.
If you want, you can read them out.
Okay. So this was the initial response that we got when we first contacted the executives and the CEO. Nicholas Roberts wrote, "To whom it may concern, when I began my capacity as the Chief Electoral Officer in the fall of 2017, I made sure to ask how the CSU boards were to be used. My first point of contact with the CSU executive was the internal coordinator, Veronica. I'm sorry, I don't want to mispronounce her last name. My first 2 meetings were with Veronica. During our second meeting, I asked Veronica what our limitations as far as the boards were concerned. Her words were clear. The boards belong to the CSU. Their use by other groups was a privilege that had been extended, and the boards were to be used at the discretion of the Chief Electoral Officer for the purpose of the elections. The reason I am indicating this is not to lay blame on Veronica or any other member of the executive. I don't think pointing fingers is helpful. Also, it was my team.
Order, please.
It was my team and I who physically took down the posters. However, what I would like to clarify is why the posters were taken down and how that decision was made. Naturally, I understand the reason for your frustration. Nobody wants their posters taken down. You paid for them, put them up, and as far as I understand, were given permission to have them on the boards. But it must be understood that I was acting upon the information from the internal coordinator, who seems to be under the impression that these boards were reserved for election purposes only. If I had known otherwise, the posters would have been left as they were. I hope that this issue is straightened out soon, and I was able to clarify some misunderstanding. Best, Nicholas."
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah. Just have a question for Fasado. Like, I'm a fine art council, and I know that like we have the whole board in there. But what I'm asking is if we can take down those things. Is there any way we can provide a board for the CSU? Because I think that I think that's also a big problem right now in there, that we don't have a board that people can use for elections specifically. So then that will lead it to using those places unless those could be provided. So that's the question is, are you guys able to provide with a board though?
Yeah, well, I think, just to respond to your question, I think we're not saying there should be no CSU nomination election posters on the boards. We're just saying it shouldn't be the same poster over and over again if it means taking down other posters. I also think we would be very happy to have a rolling board brought into the BA building so that students have more information about the elections. I saw 2 empty unused ones in the LB building like 2 days ago. So I don't think, it's not about restricting these posters from being posted at all.
Thank you. How is it?
I'd like to hear the internal coordinator, so can you please put me after?
Veronica is on the speakers list.
Yeah, so after Veronica.
Okay. Charlotte.
I just wanted to make a comment, not necessarily a question. So regardless of the questions that we have for FAFSA and also the DEO, I think that we just need to, first of all, come together and realize that the actions that were taken were very disrespectful towards FAFSA, and that we really owe them an apology for real. Because it's very disrespectful to all of the students at FAFSA who made the posters, and yeah, obviously, no matter the specifics of the situation, they were treated unfairly, so I think we owe them apologies.
Thank you very much. Rory? Oh, sorry. Okay, that was a mistake. Veronica?
Yeah. So I did have a meeting with the CEO, where I did say that the boards did belong to the CSU, and that was my bad, my mistake. This was corrected after multiple meetings with Yui, our administrative coordinator. I was not present at these meetings, but Yui did tell me that once she heard it, that I did say that the boards belong to the CSU, that they don't actually belong to them, and that Robert knew in full capacity that it wasn't his to do whatever he wants. So, yeah.
Thank you. Kemi?
You mentioned that like there were time before that like well rules sorry like it's a long day but like rules have passed and decisions have been made that like you would be warned when like the poster will be up and that didn't happen, right?
Yes.
Would it help, and I don't know if like it's in your like proposition or if it like it was discussed before, but like would it help if like if there were a specific time frame for the poster of the election to be up? So like you will know, for example, and February between like 27, 28, for example, those posters will be put around campus. So would it help if there were a specific date or not really?
Well, I think the time period is helpful, and I think that there should be a time period between when FASA is contacted about the postering before the posters will be put up, and I think that's helpful. But I don't know, like these events will always be happening at the same time. Our election will always be happening at the same time. So knowing when the posters are coming up doesn't really help us with the quantity of the posters and the other posters being taken down necessarily. I think what we're hoping for is that whoever's general coordinator next year will be contacted ahead of time so that an arrangement can be made of how much these posters can be put up around the building.
Jeremy, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I also wanted to add, like they mentioned, it's not just Fast and Art Matters. Within the month of March is when all the end of your projects and end of your shows from students within the faculty are also hosting events and doing things and getting people to come in. And those posters are also removed. So where there's an individual student that makes $250 with ticket sales, that opportunity is now lost on them because the posters have been removed, right? So it's not just us, but also our students. So I think.
Thank you. How was it?
I was just wondering, did the CEO have a conversation with Yui after he turned them down? Or was it before?
I don't know.
Well, can we please check that out? Because if he did have the clarification after talking to Yui, then I think it's a bit of a problem here.
Do you want to? Yeah.
So my initial meeting was once he got appointed in the fall. Sorry, once they got appointed in the fall. He's had multiple meetings with our staff. They've had multiple meetings with our staff, from communications to administrative coordinator to general manager.
You already had 2 questions, so I'll move on to Layla. Do you want to be put at the end? Thank you.
First of all, thanks for coming. I appreciate that this is being brought forward to a lot of students because I think one of the issues that's clearly happened is that this hasn't been passed on over the years, and that's not on you by any means, but clearly this hasn't been institutionalized in any way. And my recommendation would be that policy committee come up with a policy with just a max number of boards that can be used in the VA building, and then those boards are to be like labeled like several weeks in advance so that any students who are postering know that those boards are going to be used for elections, and when the posters are cleared off, say 3 boards for elections, they're returned to the FASA office so that if any student didn't have the chance to not poster there, they can just go collect their poster and put it up elsewhere. But I just also wanted to clarify, just because I think this is important, that we definitely do recognize that Art Matters needs were different than the other students, and I just want to be clear that in our email we offered to meet with them and talk about what their needs were as far as any reprinting or any help in that case, because I know that 20 posters would definitely not be enough to promote events at that scale, and I just want to be clear that we do recognize that, and just so that council knows, like executives have apologized on behalf of our for our responsibility in giving directives to the CEO, but I would support Charlotte's kind of mention of an apology. I think it would be good if whatever we agree on together, and I think it would be maybe good to hear from FASA also what the motion they're bringing forward is, that an apology is included in that motion, and that referring to policy committee is also included in that, because I don't think that realistically in this room we can come up with an exact policy that would satisfy the needs of FASA, but I think we should include FASA in that policy meeting about what the max number of boards in the VA building should be and what the timelines should be there.
Thank you. Veronica? Okay. Daniel?
So it's an afterthought. I'm sure FASA is not the only one affected by this. I'm sure that other people's posters get ripped down during the election time, and since, what did you say, it was 2015? So, do you remember the nature of those agreements?
I got them in my emails.
Oh, okay.
Once I got speaking to them,
I would.
Did you have a question for the professor?
I guess I'd just like to know what the nature of the agreements were and how we can like close the loopholes so that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in there's a meeting in 2015, 2016 around April, May. I looked through the meeting minutes and I found where I had spoken. And this was when Charles Barrasso was a coordinator or an executive. And the agreement there was made that this isn't there. The agreement was that the posters would be refunded and that we would be contacting FAFSA whenever posters need to be put up. This was like in the meeting minutes. In 2016, we brought up this issue with the CEO and it was included in the report. This recommendation is an extension to the recommendation made in 2015 relating to notifying the students of when the campaigning period will start. They can avoid using boards that are reserved for the elections. This election, the receptionists at the CSU were asked to notify the students asking for the board, for the posters approval stamp, about clearing the boards. This definitely, I'm just going to skip.
Yeah.
But it was not brought to my attention by FAFSA that the CSU isn't the only body with the ability to approve posters. There's also CASA, FAFSA, ASTA, and ECA. I recommend that these bodies be contacted 2 weeks before the campaigning period to be notified of what boards will be reserved. Also, it was requested by FAFSA that a FAFSA representative accompany the election team to let them know which the boards would be reserved. So that was the first recommendation in 2016. The first recommendation in 2017 was essentially the same thing. We'd like to suggest that a notification be sent out to all students before the start of the campaigning period. And continues. And so, like, we have brought this up multiple years. They say it's not going to happen in the next year, and we go and trust them, and then it's included in the reports, and it's just to us as well. The CEOs aren't reading the reports of past years and looking at the recommendations, which also was puzzling to us as well.
Thank you.
That answers your question.
Kathy?
So, I'm not sure if it's possible or not, but would it be a good compromise if the CSU were to have rolling board being there to either being borrowed or rented out? Because our election also goes at the same time as your election. The way I see it is giving a time frame for Arts Matter and FAFSA to remove the poster shouldn't be an option, because you guys do need the exposure, and taking the posters down would hinder that exposure. So maybe a good compromise for us would just have boards in the CSU and rent it out or borrow during these periods where there's a lot of events, a lot of things going on. Would that be a good compromise?
Yes, but I would use those rolling boards for the election notifications, not the normal posters that are in general.
Yeah, exactly.
There. Yeah.
For the nomination periods for CSU and then for your nominations periods as well.
Thank you. Dana?
Yeah, no, maybe I'm just not like thinking about this in enough detail, or maybe there's some nuance that I'm missing, but wouldn't it make sense to just have all the election stuff just on the wheeling boards and that's it? And just make sure the CEO knows you can't put anything on a board that's not the wheeling board marked CSU elections. That seems pretty straightforward and something that we can mandate relatively easily. I don't really see why this has been a problem for the past however many years, and especially this year.
Thank you. So at this point, we're still in discussion with no motion on the table. Mustafa? Oh, my apologies. Masri?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So, I was just going to say the conversation right now is actually very open-ended, so just to request, could we get a motion on the table so it could be a bit more directed, that we can actually come to a concrete conclusion, because right now we're just sort of going in circles.
Something to note is that the moving boards belong to facilities, not the CSU, so our ability to regulate how many there are or how likely they are to show up, even if requested, is somewhat limited. Just that if there's a policy around how many moving boards there are, there's no way to ensure that those moving boards will definitely be available, bookable, and will show up. which is why in the past there's been a mix. There's also a lot of locations where you can't have moving boards. For example, if we were limited to moving boards, it would mean the majority of the hall building would not have posters because most floors don't have a space where you could safely set up a moving board without obstructing like a fire lane or making the space inaccessible. So it might have to be a balance of both.
Peter?
So yes, as a fine student, what I want to say is that I know that we shouldn't post that much stuff on the board, but I also like wouldn't suggest to take them all down. But also like we can have a certain limit to say like don't post like 20 or 30 posters, but I would suggest not to use the drawing board also. But yeah, so I would suggest that if possible that FASA could give the CSU a limit of how many posters we can post, and then that way would be best, I think.
So I went on the CEO's directives, and it does say that posters should be on the CSU election boards or student life boards. I'm not sure if these are the boards that we're in discussion right now, and who owns these boards, if in fact they are, if these are the ones in the VA building. But I guess if it's logistically harder to get moving boards, then the better option is to just limit the number of boards that we can work with within the VA building. So like, or if not, then limit the number of, as you said, limit the number of posters per board. Now the thing is with this, it can become harder because then on top of the CEO's like nomination, those purple papers, the other teams are gonna poster on top of them. It's gonna be cluttered, but at least Art Matters and other fine arts students were not gonna lose their artwork and their posters. But I'm just kind of, I just wanted to first point out that in the directives it says what boards to use. I'm still not sure who owns these boards, and then the next step to do is to limit the number of posters in the VA building per board. That's it.
Plenty of information.
Yes.
Or, never mind, that's not information.
Just to clarify, as far as posters that like candidates put up, those boards are clearly marked. Yes, like those. Could someone speak to that? They are. The candidates ones are.
Mark the CSU stamp, you mean?
No, like the boards, like the CSU big election boards.
Yes, the CEO added a 8.5 by 11 sheet that says this board is an election board.
Right. Okay, so basically what I'm getting at is, regardless of that, there's like, the CEO's directives say that candidates can only put, one poster up per board or whatever. How hard would it be for the CEO to follow their own rules and put up one poster per board? That way, even if they do put a poster up on a board that's not theirs, then they're not destroying everything else around it. Just have some sort of limit on how many posters they can put up regardless, and then hash out the actual specifics around the boards later.
Jeremy, just one as well.
I have my motion that I can read out, but I first wanted to answer some questions.
Yeah, there's still a bit of a speakers list, so do you want me to put you guys repeat it?
I'll answer questions first.
Okay, perfect.
So the boards are owned by the university. They're owned by the Dean of Students office. The paper that was put up to say that it's CSU elections were put up at the same time that the pink posters were put up, taking down everything. I know this because I went around in December to remove the CSU postering boards because they do not belong to the CSU. So answer those questions.
Peter?
Yes, so a question to Father. Is there because right now I know that there's no board in the way building that I claimed having Father's name on the title though. So I mean I don't see why we can't put it on there, even though I know we need a limit, but right now there's absolutely no sign saying a claim by the father. So like I don't know why like we can't put it though.
Direct response.
Yeah, directly.
It's the same as we don't want to be in the same predicament as the CSU. FASA does not own these boards either. The CSU does not own these boards. Nobody owns these boards except the university, and we are have the authority to poster on them. So we don't want anything there saying that FASA owns these boards either. To answer that.
So, one of my first comments is, I guess we also have to understand a little bit on Nicholas Roberts' part, or on, I guess, the CEO and DEO's part, that there is some pressure or some impetus on them and their mandate to increase voter turnout. And compared to previous years, when this year I see more posters than before, more of the purple posters, do I think it's necessary to have them copy-pasted, 20 of them all on one board? No, not at all. But that might have been their mentality, is that in order to increase voter turnout and exposure, they wanted to have a big thing there. So I don't I agree with the intent of what Councillor Eamon has brought up, but I think restricting the CEO to only being allowed to put one poster up is kind of putting them in a hard position, because then we'd have to consider that fact when we evaluate their performance for the year, and maybe this is for next year. Secondly, I think what we should do now is we should mandate the CEO to issue an announcement or a notice to all the candidates, and to impose penalties on any candidate that is caught doing the same thing. So, regardless of what's happened as of now, moving forward, people are putting posters up now. If candidates start doing the same thing, we're rolling down a steep hill, and candidates, I'm going to make the assumption, are maybe worse than the CEO at ripping things down and putting things up on top. We know in previous elections, candidates put things on top of each other. They do all sorts of bad stuff. So I think we should issue some sort of warning that's announced immediately that candidates caught doing that will be severely, or seriously punished, or whatever. We should consider something like that just to prevent future damage to other associations' posters. Whether it's FASA's, whether it's CASA's, whether it's whoever's, this is a problem that we've identified. So those are my thoughts. I'll let someone else motion.
Thank you. Michaela?
Yeah, I guess just to respond to what Rory just said, there are limitations for candidates, and you can only post 3 posters per board. You also cannot rip any posters down under no circumstances, and you cannot go over them unless the event is already done. I think the CEO and thus the CSU needs to really be held accountable for the damages that they've done. Like Charlotte said, we really need to formally apologize. Also, I would just like to say that the CEO did this to only the VA. He did not do this to the Hall building. He did not rip any posters down in the Hall building or JMSB or anywhere else but the VA. So this is kind of an interesting thing that has happened, and I don't know if it had anything to do with the complaint about there not being enough postering in the VA, so they decided to kind of do this somewhat drastic measure. But I think there's also a problem with outreach in the CSU elections for fine art students to know about what's going on. And I also think FASA realized that, they've said in the beginning, they have no issue with CSU elections. You just really need to be respectful. So that said, I think I'm really interested in hearing their motion, but also from my point of view now, it should be taken to policy committee and be looked over by FASA so that they approve, and that this is discussed further and can actually stop this from happening, because it's ridiculous.
Thank you. Awatu?
Yeah. I just had a question on the recommendations that you were mentioning that were made a few years back, and other recommendations that were made on the recommendations. Are these recommendations, have they ever been shared with the CEO? Are they public? Did the CEO know that these recommendations exist?
Direct response.
Yeah.
This is from the CEO report, so the CEOs have written these to pass on as a learning book for future CEOs.
So they're not recommendations from FASA?
No, these are recommendations from past CEOs.
Written by the CEO from a few, each year prior to the post-election.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's a point of information, but I'm not sure who to ask. But So basically, when a candidate is running the elections, they have the CEO's directives, but I'm wondering if the CEO themselves have directives. I don't know who.
So they get trained by the previous CEO,
Okay.
and they have, I guess, direction from our staff, not really the executives because we can't be in that process. Yeah, but I mean, there's the reports from past CEOs. Yeah.
So reports and then training from previous Did they get training from the previous CEO, or was it?
So the previous CEO, Stephanie, they wrote a manual book, and they gave that to the CEO. Nobody was aware of it, so I have no idea. Nobody knows what's in it, but I guess it's kind of like a detailed report of what to do, when to do it, how to do it.
Thank you. Jared?
Yes, I just wanted to say, on account of the posters, I do feel like there should be a limit as to how much the CSU can use, because while the intent of, if we put it everywhere, then it will increase the likelihood that people will run. If you look at the facts, that just hasn't been what's happening. The last by-elections, I was the only person to run for the fine arts seat. Despite all the posters, one person ran. Right now, there are 2 people running for the council, 0 people running for Senate in the fine arts. So all those posters were put up and it's had little to no effect.
Oh, sorry, yeah, recent.
Yes. Just to direct response to what Michaela was saying earlier, like I think that right now the problem in the way bidding right now is mostly because there's no like a board that is really same for CSU, and then there's like literally no board, like no enough board, so there's only I think only 2 or 3 board for the entire building. So I think that's a problem right now, that so that's why everyone has to use them, and then and it just comes like this.
There's no one on the speakers list, so.
Oh, okay. There are actually quite a few boards in the VA building. There's a lot of boards, and there can always be alternatives for, like you said, bringing in extra boards, even if that means buying a board for the VA for this reason.
But I know.
Sorry, it's Jeremy's turn.
I'm going to read out the motion.
Okay.
Whereas the CSU has continually undermined the authority of student groups on campus in regards to postering spaces and authorization, whereas the FASA, ASFA, CACS, brackets CASA, the AEGIC, brackets ECA, and GSA have the authority to approve posters, whereas excessive postering is wasteful both materially and financially, whereas the CSU does not own any of these poster boards in the university. Be it resolved, the CSU must receive approval from the following associations: FASA, ASFA, CASA, and the ECA before postering in any building occupied by students in their respective faculty. Be it further resolved, the CSU must not print more than 4 posters per bulletin board during any by-election or election. Be it further resolved, the CSU not remove any approved posters that have not expired. Be it further resolved, the CSU allocate $5,000 towards the Art Matters Festival. Be it further resolved, the CSU allocate $5,000 towards the FASA Special Project Grant Fund. Be it further resolved, the CSU bolster the relationship with the fine arts students by having more collaborations and making more investments within the fine arts community at Concordia. Be it further resolved, the CSU supports FASA and their board of directors in presenting a new poster policy to the Concordia Council of Student Life after consultation with the ASFA, ECA, CASA, and GSA. So that's my motion. I have it written that I can pass on, but I just want to maybe mention, what's the word I'm looking for? Talk about my motion after it's made?
Oh, to motivate.
Motivate, there we go.
Okay, so I know as much as Jeremy, you loved your time as a counselor, non-counselors can't bring motions, so somebody just has to move to have their name ascribed to it, Jared, and we also need a second. Veronica? So I'll give the floor to Jeremy.
100% privilege.
Yes?
Can the motion please be put on the Facebook page, because it's kind of
Can you send it to me? And I will upload it just so everyone can follow along. So I'll do that, and then you can motivate as counselors are reading it.
That's the last thing I would want to suggest. I want to know from real agreement. You know that from Mountain? That's my opinion.
Reem, did you have a question? Sorry.
Just a discussion.
Oh, okay.
After the moderation, yeah.
So essentially,
Yep, I'll just copy paste it in. But you can start motivating if you'd like.
So for us, we believe this is completely fair. We don't think that more than 4 posters need to be on each bulletin board. We think it's completely fair that we are contacted, as well as the other faculty associations, to know that the elections are happening. $5,000 towards Art Matters seems fair to us, just because of all the work that people are putting into this festival and the blatant disrespect that they have had. $5,000 towards our special project grant fund so that we are able to fund more student projects within the fine arts faculty and community. I included in here the poster policy at Concordia just because it has not been edited since like 2003, 2005. So it's long overdue, where the acronyms for CASA and the ECA are back when they weren't, to my knowledge, accredited associations. So we just want help with that too.
And I would like to add, we met recently with Andrew Woodall and mentioned to him the poster policy and the issue, and that it needs to be amended and looked at again, and he seems very interested in doing that. I also want to add, in terms of financials, though this is an act of principle, it is also related to multiple years of the same issue being brought forward. It is not just only specific to this year's issues.
Thank you very much. So I have speakers list of Reem and then Ali.
Can I move to the bottom of the paper, please?
Yes, so then Ali and Reem.
I move to amend part of the motion, the part that says, be it resolved that the CSU receive approval from the following associations: FASAS, FACASA, ECA, before postering in any building occupied by students and their respected faculty. To amend that a meeting would take place between all associations at the beginning of every year, hosted by the CSU, to make decisions together on common rules on postering, poster boards that would be shared with all their CEOs, because I feel...
Okay, first, I need a second. Kathy, was that, okay, yeah, your motivation?
Yeah, I just feel that the way it's written down is like, basically, we can't poster without your permission, which is basically you controlling our postering in that motion. I think it would be better if we all meet at the beginning of every year, and just, I think every executive from now on would know that they would have to meet together with every other association, make decisions together. Every year it might change, no one knows, and must inform their CEOs, and thus the executives would be responsible through this, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any dissent to the amendment? So is there any opposition to it? Or can it be considered friendly? Yes?
I just like to respond. As much as that is a beautiful, lovely idea, I think the realistic possibility of everyone sitting down and finding a time to meet, especially considering the issues that often happen, and sometimes within FASA, of getting enough coordinator team and getting a strong executive team. Also, like I said, sometimes our elections are at a different time, so to have multiple CEOs in the room. I understand if there's maybe a wording thing that we can change. It's not about FASA having authority over the CSU, but I do think that by saying that it has to be a meeting, say for example you set a meeting and then the FASA rep isn't unable to attend, it places the blame on them rather than keeping the CSU responsible for the postering policy.
Did you have something to add?
To tap on to add to that as well, like I've been a part of FASA, I've been a part of the CSU. There are lots of years where all the executives try to meet at the beginning of the year and it just does not happen.
Kathy?
So I want a clarification when it says be resolved the CSU must not print more than 4 posters per bulletin board during.
Oh, sorry,
so-
Kathy, we're on just the amendment right now.
Oh, okay.
So we'll just discuss that and I can move on the speakers list. Mustafa?
Yeah, I understand the concern that it might not be logistical or easy or efficient that executives will meet at the beginning of the year. But the thing is with wording is that must receive exactly the word must receive approval. We also as the CSU, what if, for example, CASA decided they didn't want to give us approval for using any of the boards or postering rights. So that's also something that's why wording here matters. We need to also know that we will get our right to poster regardless if it's limited or not. So that's only my concern.
Yeah, I also overall agree with what's been said a lot, but the first be it resolved I also see as a bit problematic, and I think, well, not problematic, it maybe isn't the right word, but I see issues with it, and I think there's a difference between FASA's scenario in the VA and say like PASFA's scenario or hall building, because under this receiving approval from the associations before postering in any building occupied by students and their respective faculty, technically we need to speak to all 4 of them before postering in hall because they all have classes in hall. I just don't think that's realistic. Also, I find it notable that so far, to the best of my knowledge and to what I've heard here today, this hasn't been an issue with ASFA, CASA, or the ECA, and I think it's important that it's still still stated that we have respect for their posters as well, because this obviously is something that could be an issue for them. But I think for the sake of this motion, it might be best to just kind of going off what Ali had mentioned before, have a meeting with FASA specifically to discuss postering in the VA at the beginning of the year, and having a meeting or maybe a policy written specific for the VA if a meeting isn't possible, but something specific to the VA being added in here instead of the university at large.
Thank you. So just a reminder, we're on the amendment to the first be it resolved that was proposed that a meeting take place instead of the receiving approval part. Rory? Okay. Jeremy?
Can I suggest that that's the first be resolved be the CSU must contact the following associations. We can take out the must receive approval from.
You may suggest it, yes.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Thank you. Speakers list is open.
Can we just grant them temporary rights?
No. Ahmed?
If it's related to the election, I would say the CEO need to contact the 4 association, and it's not the CSU, because as us as an executive, I prefer not to have any interactions with the election. It's the CEO job, and the CEO job must.
Thank you. Do you have a response?
Not in direct response to that,
Okay.
just on the amendment.
I'll put you on the speakers list to discuss. Layla? Layla?
I think one of the issues I see with around the kind of boards and how is just that as long as it's a recommendation for a meeting or something like that, there's every reason why that might not happen, and there's not a lot of recourse when those things don't happen. In my eyes, the most clear thing to do would just be to establish an appropriate amount of boards that can exist, and we can say in the VA we could also extend it to other buildings if people feel like that should be specified. And then just then the CEO, when the CEO sends directives to the candidates, they have to indicate which boards specifically, and maybe even include pictures, are available to the candidates. And we can decide on a number that wouldn't impede fine arts or any other student's ability to advertise, but would also keep things very clear. And so, and I think my recommendation would be to send that to policy committee. I think they'd be able to truly consider a policy that would be more binding than an agreement that we would make now about a meeting that should take place basically a year from now.
Thank you. Layla?
Michaela?
Oh, Michaela, sorry. Just did the same thing.
I definitely agree with Layla and Roman in bringing this to policy committee. It should be binding. It should not happen again. We really need to be thorough about this, I think, so that, like I said, it doesn't happen again. I think, we don't want executives to be directly involved with the elections, obviously, but unfortunately, right now, the CEO can quit. They can. It's a very unstable position right now with the way that the electoral system works. So I think at this point, it needs to be done through CSU executives to have a meeting to inform the CEO just on that point. Whoever the CEO is, if it changes, you have to make sure that they're informed about it.
Thank you. Ali?
The part about meeting every year, it's more like at the beginning of the mandate. I didn't mean at the end of a mandate. But I mean, I don't know when you guys have elections, so I wouldn't know when the beginning of a mandate would be for you guys too. It's just, I think that this shouldn't be like permission and it shouldn't go on the entire CSU, because this wouldn't only affect CSU elections, this would also affect campaigning, like CSU campaigns. It would affect anything related to CSU. That means that we need to get permission from you guys. So that was the reason why I made that amendment. I guess that's it.
Yes,
I'd just like to make a direct response to that and then talk a bit about the amendment. This idea that the CEO is not in some way a representative of the CSU is a little conflicting for me, just because I feel like he's hired by the CSU, they're a representative of the CSU, so it doesn't necessarily need to be specific to CEO in the motion. Just on this idea of the meeting permission, I understand what you're saying, and I think the idea of contacting might, like the word change to contacting, might be more appropriate. And if the motion does get approved that it's only 4 posters per bulletin board, then there won't be as much need of this idea of needing approval, because it will already be a precedent of only the maximum you can put per bulletin board.
Thank you. I'll put you this. Penny?
Yeah, so I was thinking that maybe like if we agree to have contact, the different association, maybe we should add also that there needs to be an email of reception, so like an answer saying that like, yes, we received your message, because I can clearly see how like it will be like, yeah, we contacted you, which is the day before or something like that. So yeah, that's all.
Just as far as a meeting at the beginning of the mandate, there's no way to know for sure when the elections will be, like as a precise date at the beginning of a mandate. And there's also, I agree it's a bit confusing how the CEO relates to the CSU, but a large part of their role, and this is something that the CEO has raised, is about needing to keep a certain distance from the CSU. And so the reason why I think it's important to assign a task to somebody specific, and I would argue that it should be the CEO, is specifically so that people can be held accountable. Saying the CSU should contact FASA doesn't really allow for anyone to be held responsible if that contact doesn't happen, whereas saying the CEO needs to designate 4 boards within the VA building that will be cleared with due notice given, puts that responsibility on the CEO and means that if they're not fulfilling their duty, there's someone to be held accountable. Because even in a situation like this, you could argue that it's the CEO, you could argue that it's our predecessors not having institutionalized the information, you could argue that it's the executive because we should have trained the CEO better, that it's I think that it's important to, if there's a change, I think there should be a change in policy, and I think it should be specific as to who's responsible, because it's that lack of clarity that means that this information doesn't get passed on.
Thank you. Rory?
Are we on an amendment or?
Yes, we're on the amendment.
I rescind.
Okay, Ali?
No, that's it.
Okay, so there's currently no one on the speakers list, so if there's nothing further, we can move to a vote on the amendment, which was that a meeting take place hosted by the CSU to make common rules on postering, to replace the first be it resolved that the CSU must receive approval, etc., etc. Yes?
So is the meeting, does the amendment mean that the meeting will be held with every association, like the associations that are mentioned, or only?
It does not state it. It just says that a meeting take place hosted by the CSU was the wording. So that's currently what we're voting on. Okay, if everyone could keep their comings and goings to a minimum. For some reason there's a door thing that makes noise, so if we could, I understand sometimes we have to use the facilities, but if we could just please try to keep it to a minimum for the moment. There will be a recess after this point. Sorry, did you have a question?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just a question, is it CEO or CSU? And is it incoming members of the CSU?
It was not stated as the amendment is currently written. Yes.
Just another point on this amendment. I think it's heavy to unnecessary to put the responsibility of the CSU postering onto FASA coordinators for next year in having a meeting. It's placing the responsibility of the CSU elections on the FASA team for next year to create time to sit down and go into the postering policy instead of having a very clean and cut, this is how many posters you can do per bulletin board. You must contact us 2 weeks before. By creating a meeting, you're asking the FASA team to come in and spend time on the CSU elections.
Thank you. Ali?
So just I think that we should change the word CSU. Can it be changed from CSU to CEO, like CSU CEO? Like,
Is it amendment? Is it an amendment you're proposing?
yeah, is that
Yes,
possible
you can move to amend your own amendment. When we make amendments, just really try to be clear, because what happens is that if you're not clear in the amendment and you throw it out on the fly, then it engages in this discussion where nobody knows what anything means. So just try to think of that next time we make amendments, please.
So in this regards, yeah, that would change, and also it would be directed to FASA specifically, because the issue was in the VA.
Okay, how do you want it worded?
Oh, 1 second. So a meeting would be held between FASA and the CSU CEO to create common rules on poster boards.
Okay, do we have a second for the amendment to the amendment? Jared? Is everybody okay with the wording that we're voting on? Okay, so the wording that we have is that a meeting would be held between FASA and the CSU CEO to create common rules on postering instead of the first be it resolved is what's on the table currently. Right? And there's no further speakers list. So if there's nothing further, we can move to a vote. So all those in favor of the amendment, please raise your placards. $13, all those opposed? 1, 2, and any abstentions? 7. All right, so the motion or the amendment carries, which means that that will replace the first be it resolved. So we're back on the main speakers list, which is Reem and then Rory.
I'd like to make a few points on the motion. So, first of all,
If you speak up a little.
Okay, speak up, yeah. So yeah, first of all, they're going to be, how I see it right now, there are going to be many amendments. We started with the first one where we had to agree about a meeting, who's going to meet, when we're going to meet. The second problematic thing that I see is the number of posters per board that is suggested by an entity that is not the CSU. So I think that this has to be clarified in a policy by the CSU itself. They have to take into consideration like the opinion of the other associations, but also I don't agree with the number because if we're going to limit the CSU to a specific number of posters per board, then that has to take into consideration the size of the association and all these things, and compared to the size of other associations and how active it is. There are a lot of things that go into this. So I personally think this has to be like decided and have a clear policy so we are not confused and the other associations are not confused. I don't think this is something to be decided on like by this motion. The third thing is the $5,000 and $5,000. I currently do not understand why we should be paying this amount to because of the problem that happened. I understand that it was unfortunate and there should be some type of some type of agreement that we have to find, but it seems like a huge amount that is going out of the student money and is not like, I don't see how it's related to the elections, I don't see the link. So if I could get a clarification on that. So yeah, and I recommend to send this to the policy committee as well.
Did you just want to directly respond to her?
Yeah, so in regarding to I'll start with the finances, like I mentioned before, this is not money that's going to FAFSA, it's going directly to student-led projects. So all the money that we're requesting is going directly back into student-led projects, either special project grants, which multiple of those were the posters that were affected when the posters were ripped down, these student-led projects that have minimal budgets that can't afford to have their posters reprinted, or if their event has already passed within the time that the elections, the nomination period posters were put up in replace of them. And the other was for Art Matters, because this is a huge festival that they put on every year, and they spent way more money on these posters than we did on the posters that got ripped down. Additionally, they have over, I think, 13 exhibitions and all those posters were ripped down as well, so they lost publicity as well as the finances for the posters themselves. And these posters can't be reprinted by the CSU the same way that other posters can. So that's a big part of it. It's also because it has happened so many years in the making. This means that there's been 3-4 years now, probably longer, but 3-4 years now that it's been documented and talked about that these posters have still been ripped down and these issues have come up again and again and again. So like I mentioned before, this is not just about this year and the amount of posters that were taken down, it's also the principle of years of being mistreated by CEOs in by-election times. I just want to add that the motion specifically says they must not print more than 4 posters per bulletin board during a by-election or election, so it's specific to the election season. And it's 4 posters per bulletin board, not per building. So you could still essentially have 100 posters up per building, or just within the VA building alone. But it's just per bulletin board, there's only 4.
Okay, so I move to divide the question to limit this motion to the be it resolved they must not print more than 4 posters per bulletin, or the CSU not remove any approved poster that's expired, allocate $5,000 to the Art Matters Festival, and allocate $5,000 towards the FAFSA Special Project Grant Fund. So it's basically, I'm moving to divide the rest of it into a separate thing. Can I motivate?
Yeah, so we need a second first. We have a second? Joe?
Okay, so the reason, so I guess this is sort of coming off of what Reem has said. A lot of these issues, like this agenda point was added at the last minute, and I don't think that we've spent an hour on this conversation already, and we might spend a lot more time debating the intricacies of how many posters and how we're going to set up a meeting or how we're going to support FAFSA and their board with this new poster policy, etc. I think what's critical to do right now is to make reparations for the wrongs that FAFSA has incurred. That's the middle of this motion. It's giving them some money, and then promising that we're not going to remove any posters that haven't expired. Apart from that, the rest of this should go to policy committee or should be tabled to a council where we can all have the time to prepare for the agenda point, look at what's going on with posters right now, look at the postering policy, have the time to prepare and think about it, and come back and debate the rest of these individual clauses separately. I don't care if we send it to committee or not. All I'm doing is moving to divide them, and then someone else can say, let's send it to committee, or let's bring it back on the table at next council. But I just don't think that it's right for us to make this decision now about all these specific things, just because there's an impetus from FAFSA on this one issue.
Thank you. So there's no debate on a motion to divide. I tried to put it in the Facebook group as the division, but the space break didn't show up mostly, just so everyone knows what the division is. So the current motion on the table is to divide. If you're voting yes, you want to separate them in 2. If you're voting no, then you want to keep everything together and then vote on it.
Sorry, yeah, the not print more than 4 was with the other ones.
Oh, it was, sorry, okay,
Yeah,
that
sorry.
was my bad.
I missed it. So there's 3 of them, and then the rest of them.
Okay. Okay, just so we're all clear on what we're dividing into.
You can just edit the post.
There we go. Okay, so that should show the division there. All right, so all those in favor of dividing the motion as it is written, please raise your placards. 19, all those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 1. Perfect. Okay, so the motion is divided, and we're back on the speakers list before. What's it?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. That is up to council. Would council like to debate, just for simplicity's sake, would council like to debate the first part first and the second part second?
I would suggest to start with the second part, since this was the sense of the division.
Is everyone okay with debating the second part first? Yeah. Okay. So current speakers list is Wasif, Kemi, Ali, and then Veronica.
With all can I talk? Okay. With all respect to the damages that the students have occurred with tearing their posters out and because of their events and everything, I'm just wondering, how was it that you budgeted $5,000? Just for the sake of me knowing what am I voting on, just want to know, how did you come up with $5,000? Why wasn't it more? Why wasn't it less? I just want to know, where did $5,000 come from? Like, how did you calculate that?
Do you have a current response?
It was actually more originally, and then we took it down. How I collected the $5,000 towards the special project grant was looking through all the projects that we funded this year and how many were doing end of year shows, how many people were depending on money for their projects. I also considered how many people budgeted for postering, and $5,000 was roughly the amount that the projects had collectively budgeted towards postering. It was more like $6,895. For the Art Matters ones, I talked with them. We looked at the amount of labor and work that went into printing these, as well as the loss of sales at their end of year party and stuff like that. We're also taking into consideration.
Thank you. Eddie? Harrison. Ali?
Harrison.
Veronica? Harrison. All right, Green?
I understand. Thank you for the explanations, but yeah, thank you guys for the explanations. And I understand that these damages have to be accounted for, and the CSU has to take responsibility for these damages. But for me to vote on this amount, I would like to see like a breakdown and like a more concise explanation of how these damages amounted to this amount. It's just that I don't feel comfortable voting on just 5,000 and 5,000 without knowing clearly why this amount is stated, what are the details, just like a list with all the things that happen, all the things that need to be accounted for. It would be more reasonable for us as councillors to vote when knowing what are we voting for and what exactly, like just a little investigation basically.
Thank you. Dan?
I'd like to put a motion to table the 4 posters. The number of posters, I feel like we could just run around in circles for hours. On the actual number of posters, like the 3rd division in it, I just would like to table that and move it to next meeting.
We're only talking about the second part, so it's the last 3. So it would be a further resolve the CSU not remove any approved posters, and then the 2 5,000 ones. So right now we're just talking about the second half of the motion. So after we move to divide. So if you want to talk about the first half, we'll do that after.
Okay.
Yeah, just I guess it would be like kind of information. How many posters were up? Did you say, Tish? Like they got
There's no way for us.
Yeah.
He asked how many posters were removed. For us, there's no way to actually count because everything was just stripped down.
I'm sure it was a ton.
But they were full.
Right. Which is like the point I'm getting is like there were a ton of posters up. Art is like the work people put into this is like work. They deserve like free compensation for it. I think that the $5,000 is totally fair.
Go ahead.
I would just like to say, direct respond, or just respond to you as well on the topic. Like, there's no way for us to know, especially when we're looking back the last few years, how much money was spent on posters and break that down for you, and when they were taken down. We don't have that information. We have some of that information, but I think it is also about, like we said, like was mentioned, these posters are posters that artists make. So there's also a lot of labor that goes into making the posters, and there's no way to know. We can't ask every single person who put up a poster how many hours they spent on the poster. We can't ask every single person who put up a poster how much money they think they lost from the posters being taken down. because we just don't even know what exactly the amount of posters and how many events posters were up because they were put away.
Can I have a direct response? No, it wasn't a question, but I'll put that back on the speaker list. Michaela? Layla, sorry. Michaela. It is Michaela. I pointed at Layla.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
We'll do this all evening.
Like Fasa has said, this has been many years, and Art Matters is happening right now. So I think it's very important that we deal with this now. I understand that it's kind of last minute, but I think they've been very clear about what's happened. Basically, it's going back to fine art students. It's not wasted money. It's, these grants actually really help students help foster their careers as artists. And it's supporting a very important part of the Concordia community. So I think we should be voting on this now and taking into consideration the amount of work that has been lost and the amount of years that this has been happening.
Thank you. Kathy?
I just have a question. Is it specified that just this year or from now moving forward to the next 10 years, I guess?
It's not, resolutions, when they're adopted, there's no discontinuity between the boards. So technically they go forward. Peter?
Yes, so what I don't understand right now is the $5,000 because it is a huge amount first of all, and I mean I understand the bad with all taking down the posters and some of that, but I don't see why the 5,000 has to be given, because I just think that this will be way too much just because of this, they did that kind of thing wrong, and then students had to spend those amount of money just because someone did it wrong or removed those posters down, even though it is bad, but I just don't see the whole point. So I would like a direct response from Fasa, how why it has to be this amount, this the amount that you guys were saying with the whole project thing and all that, but I'm just not sure why it has to be 5,000 though.
So like Jeremy mentioned, we did a calculation of how much we had allocated to postering this semester for special project grants and around this time of year, and it was more than $5,000 that we had allocated specifically for postering for student-initiated projects. I just want to re-emphasize that the goal of these financial request from CSU is more of a principle of respect and sign that CSU values the work of fine arts students regardless of their posters being taken down by the CEO. This is not about, like was mentioned before, this does not go to FASA. We're not going to have a party with this money. It goes directly into student project funding and Art Matters Festival, which is a student-initiated festival. It's not about, it's also it's the principle of saying that we respect you, we value your work as artists and students, even though you're in a building 15 minutes away. We respect your work, and it is a written apology to me is not enough to repair the damages that were made in this specific situation and in the years that have gone into these issues being a problem in the CSU.
Thank you. I would say.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something because I kind of heard that those $5,000 are also for the past years that the CEO was taking out posters. Is this right, or this is just for this year? What happened this year?
The 5,000 amount.
Yeah.
That we're requesting.
Yeah, for each.
Is for the special project grant specifically was based off a calculation and also just as a principle.
The calculation for the past years that you.
We didn't calculate the past years,
Okay.
so it's just from this year that
Okay.
we calculated here.
Thank you. Irene?
I just like to clarify that yes, it's a matter of principle, and the CSU must respect and must show respect to these associations. My only concern is that us, as counselors, we need some sort of clarification. If there are calculations, maybe we need to see them. If there should be, if we have to go over this amount, I'm willing to. It's just that it seems unreasonable to me that I have to vote on something that I don't have details and calculations for. This is the only point that I would like to make.
Direct response.
Yes.
Despite the amount of work, the amount of money that we have funded towards these posters, and despite the number of posters that were printed, despite the cost that it costs to make all these posters, the other principle is that the CSU is disrespecting artists, and the CSU has constantly undervalued art by tearing down all these posters. They're undervaluing the events that FASA has funded, they're undervaluing the events that students are participating in, they're undervaluing the festival. Like, that is what this money ultimately is symbolic of. Like, that's what, to us, this money is representing. Like, the 5,000 was made from the cost of posters, but it's not about just the cost of the posters to us.
Yeah, it's about the student who walked into school the next day and saw that the poster for their event that was happening this weekend was ripped down by someone from the CSU.
Thank you very much. Joe?
I'm going to call the question.
Okay, we have a second? Charlotte? All right, so there's no debate on call to question. All those in favor of calling the question, please raise your placards. If somebody's called the question, there's no debate on it, sorry. All right, all those in favor of calling the question, please raise your placards. 17, all those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect, so that carries. So what we're voting on currently is the division, sorry, not the division, is the divided question, the last 3, be it resolves. So, sorry, be it resolved that CSU not remove any approved posters that have not expired, be it further resolved that CSU allocate $5,000 towards the Art Matters Festival, and be it further resolved that CSU allocate $5,000 towards the FASA Special Project Grant. So those are the only 3 things that we're currently voting on. So with that being said, all those in favor, please raise your placards. 15, all those opposed? 1, 2, and any abstentions? 6, 7. All right, perfect. So that carries. And we're now on the first part of the motion. Yes, Rory?
I move to send the first part of the motion to policy committee.
Okay, do we have a second? Ali, your motivation?
I think it would be better to have policy committee go over these points, review the postering policy, talk to external parties, and then to have policy committee come back to council with a nice, concise proposal and reasons why and why not, blah, 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 rather than us wasting time debating and debating and debating.
Thank you. Is there any discussion to be had on referring to policy? Yes, Leah? Oh, yes, FASA
I
representative?
would just like to encourage or include some inclusion of FAFSA in when this policy is presented or after it's going through the policy committee, and maybe extend an invitation to FAFSA to that council meeting when it is presented and being decided upon.
The academic and advocacy coordinator is the chair of policy. Can we trust that it will be? Yes, I was in.
Are you asking that people from FASA would be invited to policy committee to write the policy with us, or after the policy is made, there will be discussions about the policy with FASA?
I think keeping FAFSA included in the conversation as the policy is being created, and then inviting them to be here when it's presented to the council.
Thank you. Okay, my question still stands. Can anybody be trusted to let policy committee know that FAFSA should be included? Perfect. Rowan?
Going off of that comment, I was actually going to say that policy committee is open session, and I don't sit on it, but I recommend someone who does reach out to FASA, because FASA is more than welcome to join in on the conversation and actually be with policy committee as it's written if they want to.
Thank you. Sorry, Jeremy, I missed your hand.
Yeah, I think even just reviewing the policy once it's created before it's passed, moved to council, so that FASA can have input on it would be fine. What I also wanted to say, though, was despite whatever policy is written at policy committee at the CSU and passed the CSU council, the boards are still owned by Concordia. So despite whatever policy you pass, it might not be applicable to the actual poster policy of Concordia. that's why we were asking for the collaboration to rewrite the poster policy as well. Just to throw that in.
Layla and then Rory. Sorry, Rory. I printed in the wrong order. I'm so sorry, Rory and then Layla.
I just wanted to clarify. I'm not saying that policy committee needs to come up with a policy. I'm referring these motion clauses to policy committee. Whether they come up with a policy or not is up to them. But it's just for them to review these clauses and maybe come back with some suggestions. So it's not to say that we're going to create a policy. But one of the things you have in there is that we do create a policy, or that we support you in presenting it to whoever, dean of students, whatever's in there. So just to clarify for everyone, we're just sending this to policy committee to discuss, not to create anything.
Thank you. Layla?
I understand.
Okay. So if there's no further discussion, we can vote on the motion to refer to policy committee. All those in favor, please vote. Raise your placards. (22) All those opposed? 0. And any abstentions? 0. All right. So that carries. Yes, Veronica?
I think we need a motion to figure out where this funding is going to come from.
Okay.
Can I motion something?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to motion that this $10,000 come from the CEO's budget for these elections.
Okay. Do we have a second? Ali, your motivation?
I believe that this is just fair that it comes out from his budget line since he was responsible for this.
Okay. Is there any discussion? Yes, Michaela, Layla, and then Awitsu.
While I agree that the CEO technically did this and that there should be some of the budget taken out, it was also our responsibility as the CSU from the past few years to do something about this, and we haven't. So I think this should also maybe be decided somewhere else instead of throwing around numbers right now.
Thank you. Layla?
I really support the idea of this coming from the CEO's budget, not just because I think that it would further carry in the CEO's reports if elections come in over budget by $10,000. Hopefully that will make it clearer to the next CEO that this is a very important issue, but also that I think that it's important that this comes from the area that it most clearly reflects, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Awitsu?
I just feel like even though this is mostly the CEO's fault, I also feel like he received no training. He received a few no training from the previous CEO, which might have affected that, and we don't know whether when he met with Yui about the boards, was it after he turned those posters or was it before? And I think it's the SCSU that has another 50% of the fault for this. So I don't think this should be taken 100% from the CEO's budget. And I also don't know how much is the CEO's budget. So can I get a clarification how much that is? So we know this $10,000, how much is it gonna reflect on the budget that he has?
I don't know the exact number, but I think it's about $65,000, maybe a little more, up to 70. I think maybe Camden could take a look.
Yes.
And how much was used till now?
Camden, do you have a direct response?
Well, yeah, the last time I checked, it was $72,500, like the total budget, and like $21,000 was used.
Okay.
But we don't know what he's planning on using right now.
Thank you. Layla?
I think just to be clear, just because something comes out of someone's budget doesn't mean that they're personally affected by that. That's just what they've budgeted, and I think that part of the reason that it helps to have it come from this budget line is, unlike it coming from MISC, which leaves no indication for next year that this would be a factor in the elections, it will be in the election report, and it's not ultimately it's all the CSU's budget. It's always coming from the CSU, but placing it under elections just makes it clear where this issue came from, and I think will hopefully, I think the point of the CEO not getting any training, the documents that they did have at their disposal were definitely the CEO's reports, and I think that if in some very frustrating circumstance the training isn't changed for next year, then the least they will have is that report where it will say that $10,000 had to be allocated to FAFSA in damages because of the inappropriate postering that was done in the VA. I think that if we want this amount to both be accorded to FAFSA in the way that's appropriate, but also to ensure this doesn't happen again, it's best to put it in a budget line where it will actually be noticed, reflected, and taken into account for next year.
Thank you. Mustafa?
Yeah. Well, continuing on the discussion, it's just that for me, what it looks like taking $10,000 out of the budget. I understand the CEO has an over budget, and that $10,000 does not affect them. While it just for me is the principle again that the CSU is actually kind of, I don't want to use the word punish, but like we're actually ready to undermine the CEO's position as a position, as in principle, not the CEO that might have been misinformed about what happened and the mistakes that were produced after that. But in principle, for me, it just doesn't sit well that the CSU is ready to even, like, in a sense, quote unquote, punish the CEO for what has happened. I don't like it.
So for this year, I feel like certain responsibility and accountability should be held by the CEO, but for next year and ongoing, I think there should be a budget line made especially for Arts Matters and FAFSA.
This is just a one-time thing. Just this year, it's $10,000.
The $10,000? It wouldn't be for...
No, it's just this year.
Oh, okay. Then never mind.
I just wanted to ask a quick question. Now I understand that the CEO's budget is big. I just want to know whether taking those $10,000 would be affecting the elections anyhow. And I know that he only used $20,000 now, and there's around 30 left. I just want to know whether it's going to be affecting the elections. So, no?
No, it won't affect the elections. If we go over budget, it's something that we will absorb anyways. It's just going, like Layla said, it's going to, like, at the CEO report next year, we will know not to do this again. The CEO will know.
Thank you. Rowan?
Yeah, kind of going off what other people have already said, like putting this money in this budget line is simply a matter of like clarifying where this money is coming from, where it's being spent. It's more like keeping notes on what happened than it is any sort of like retaliation against the CEO. Specifically to Mustafa's comment, I really don't see how this is any sort of punishment or undermining. This is about keeping track of where the money is coming from. By no means does it affect the CEO's like salary or anything like that. It certainly doesn't, and like as other people have said, the CEO can simply go over budget because of this. In fact, it's quite likely that the CEO would go over budget because of this, and this would be used to explain why in his report.
Yeah, after what's been said, I agree. I think it should be definitely in the budget line if that's going to make it clear that this has been a big issue regarding the elections. So yeah, that is my say. I think we should.
Jared?
Can we call the question?
There's one more person on this speakers list. Did you have a question?
Yeah, just like a comment. Like I think it is important to do like a breakdown, like why this budget, like a real like clear breakdown. I think with this breakdown we can, it will clarify like what amount of money that the CSU will allocate to those associations.
Thank you. Okay, so at this point there's no one else on the speakers list, so we're moving on the motion that the $10,000 come from the CEO's budget. So all those in favor, please raise your placards. 16, all those opposed? 1, 2, and any abstentions? 2, 3. Perfect. So that carries. And at the moment there is, yes, Jeremy?
I just want to say thank you for letting us come in and speak, and for taking this issue seriously. Cleopatra had to leave; she had another meeting that she had to get to. But thank you. There's 2 journals being passed around right now. You all can keep them. There's a 3rd one here from Art Matters if you also want to take a look.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and Cleopatra as well. Charlotte?
Can I just make one final motion?
Yes.
I would just like to say, as well, you did get the money that they deserve, but I also just think that this motion is appropriate. So whereas the CSU has greatly disrespected FASA and the students in the fine arts faculty by the mistreatment and disregarding of their posters, be it resolved that the CSU executives draft an apology letter to FASA to be signed by council and the CEO. Sorry.
Thank you. It's fairly short, but just for simplicity's sake, if you could upload it into the group, that would be excellent. Seconded by Kemi. Do you want to motivate?
I think that I can, but I don't think it needs a motivation. We just have done an injustice to FASA as an entity, and that deserves to be noted officially.
Thank you. Okay, so if there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 2, 3. Perfect. So that carries. Yes, I would do.
Can I have my yes noted?
Yes. You may.
Mine noted.
Okay. All right. Is there any more discussion on the point of FASA? All right. Once again, thank you, Jeremy, for gracing us with your presence.
Thank you. Sorry for making your
All right, so at this point, I feel like we should probably take a recess. Just on a note, the room has very poor acoustics and a very strange setup. So for the next meeting, I'm going to send another email to try and get a side table. Any of your comments on what else could be helpful are truly welcome. Unfortunately, we don't know what we're going to get since the CSU's H building rooms are in renovation.
And also,
sorry, just we listen to Devin for a second.
I got a cake for tonight. Wow, I can hardly hear myself right now. I'm just gonna cut it up as best as I can because there are a lot of people, and there's also everything's vegan, and there's one gluten-free thing that I'm gonna cut up as well for people who have seen.
Is it tiramisu yet?
It is. It's tiramisu. I'm allergic to peanuts.
Oh, perfect.
It's 8:40 and we will reconvene. So I think there's a couple of people who left. We should be okay for chairs. So if there's anyone missing missing anything, or in terms of space or in terms of chairs, your habitation at council, please just raise your placard and point of privilege me or anything like that, and we will fix this. Don't worry. Okay, so with that being said, we're on 7B, which is investment manager.
Can we move to closed session?
Yep, do we have a second? Joe? Okay, so all those in favor of moving into closed, please raise your placards. 13, all those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 1. Okay, so that carries. So if anyone who's not executive council, myself, minute keeper, and judicial board could please step out of the room, we'll call you back when we're back in open session. Thank you. Yes, Rowan.
I move to ratify the decisions made in closed session.
All right, do we have a second? Ali. All right, all those in favor, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 0. Perfect. So that carries. Is there anything else to mention on investment manager? Okay. The next 2 points, I had a request to table them as Rory has to step out. So either until next meeting or until they get back. So kind of strange table, but yes, Rowan.
Move to table these last 2 points.
Okay, do we have a second? Ali? All those in favor, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 0. Perfect. So that carries. With that, we are on orientation post-mortem, and this is yours, Layla.
So, whereas the Student Life Coordinator is mandated to submit a winter orientation post-mortem by the March council meeting, whereas not all the financial documents from the costs associated with the university have been received by the CSU, be it resolved that the report be pushed until the next council meeting in April, notwithstanding Standing Regulation 401.
Thank you. Wait a second. Veronica, your motivation?
Oh, my motivation? Sorry. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Alright. Is there any discussion to be had on postponing the report till next meeting? Okay, so with that, all those in favor, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 0. All right, so that carries. Is there anything else to be mentioned on orientation postmortem? Okay, so if not, we can move to chair and minute keeper pay. And Camden. Okay, do we have a second? Dylan. All those in favor of tabling to next meeting, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 0. All right, so that will show up again in April, along with possibly other things. All right, we are on Gender Advocacy Committee, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who had moved this. Yes, Layla.
Okay, I'll start with the motion. Whereas many issues have arisen this year pertaining to gendered violence, whereas this is an issue that will presumably continue to be relevant in years to come, be it resolved that an ad hoc committee with the topic of gender advocacy be struck until the end of this year's mandate with the recommendation that it be struck again in the upcoming year to be ratified in a by-election to become a standing committee.
All right. Do you have the wording written down?
I can send it to you.
Perfect. Okay, do we have a second? Kemi, your motivation.
So, as I said, there have been several issues that have come up this year that I believe would have served well to have been addressed in a forum specific to gender advocacy or feminism. I'm saying gender advocacy just because I think it's important that if there's a group dedicated to what would typically be like a women's caucus, that it be open to people who don't identify solely as a woman, but with the idea that it be primarily geared towards people who identify as women or as non-binary. The goal of this committee, this has also come up because of some opportunities to have representation from the CSU in the annual general meeting of the Fédération des Femmes du Québec. And I think it would be appropriate that if we choose to have representation there, that we also have a means to address those sorts of issues within council. So I think it would be good. Also, it would mean that certain issues could be properly referred to a committee that may have the interest and expertise to address them, much in the same way that we do with things like policy.
Thank you. Is there any discussion to be had on gender advocacy committee? Yes, Dylan.
What do you see as the desired outcome for this standing committee? Could we have some practical examples of work that they would be performing on a regular basis, as well as what would be the composition? It would be the board as well, just this board?
So my recommendation would be that there would be, I would say, but I don't have an exact recommendation for the composition. I'm pretty flexible, but I think it would be ideally made up of executives, counselors, and a student at large in the similar way that other standing committees are. So possibly 1 or 2 executives, 3 or 4 counselors, and 1 to 2 students at large, and that could be expanded to have support members if that feels appropriate. I think some of the possible day-to-day, or not, but like meeting-to-meeting issues could be things like, for example, we organized the Congress on Campus Sexual Violence. That's something that doesn't fall necessarily within a particular executive's role. I would say it falls between myself and ASMA as far as student life and advocacy, but there wasn't a committee that was really appropriate to also discuss these things with. We wound up creating like a mobilization committee for this purpose, but I think the event would have benefited from having a committee that was already prepared to address these sorts of issues. I think also in the case of what came up in the English department, that would have been a committee that could have been in a good position to review some of the recommendations, to meet with CASE, for example. There just isn't really a dedicated space to address gendered violence, or for example, if there was a need to review what kinds of training executives could have, the Gender Advocacy Committee could be one to make recommendations over what trainings would be appropriate.
Do you have a follow-up?
And as of right now, there's like I see only one example of daily operations or an activity that could be beneficial by having an existing board. Are you saying that these other elements are things that you believe, or that the general population believes need to be worked on further for those specific examples? I'm just curious of the intent, not intent.
I think definitely in the future there's also a possibility of allocating a budget line in a similar way that other committees have budget lines to assign to projects that they feel encompass the mandate of the committee. That could be something that could be looked at. But also in the case of the Fédération des Femmes du Québec, if there were members who went and attended the AGM and were able to vote there, they would presumably bring back mandates that the CSU should vote on. And I think rather than have that be at random, I think it would be good to have a forum where that could kind of come through in a more official manner.
I have another person on the speaker, so I'll just put you on the speakers list after. Sophie?
Yeah, I just want to say, sort of reiterate what Leila said, like, I think having a standing committee for gender issues is incredibly important. We have a BIPOC committee to help other marginalized voices, and I think it's really important that we continue working to make sure that the feminist policies that we have in our positions book are actually being implemented in a way that's helpful, and having a standing committee to help do that and implement changes that would be helpful for things like intersectionality on campus is just another way of day-to-day practices that maybe are difficult for certain people to comprehend, but would be really helpful for marginalized communities on campus as a whole.
Thank you. Dylan?
Isn't there curiosity? I remember hearing about this in the past, but doesn't the Concordia community already have an organization which main aspect is for gender equality? I'm not sure if it falls directly under the CSU's umbrella organizations, but maybe someone who has that information can provide it.
Layla.
The Center for Gender Advocacy is a fee levy group. It's not associated with the CSU. So in the same way that Sustainable Concordia is a fee levy group, that doesn't mean that CSU would naturally have a sustainability policy because of that.
Thank you. Kemi, did you have something to add, or are you just okay? Great. Yes, Dylan?
Have we reached out to them in the past to do some of these daily operations and see if they're willing to help us out and work with us to change our policies, bring things up to date, and aid in the awareness?
We've worked with them. They've given us certain trainings, but again, I don't think that involving an outside group is necessarily enough to ensure that it's kind of institutionalized within the CSU.
Thank you. Kemi, and then Dylan, if you have another question? There's one more person on the speakers list. Did you have a question, Dylan, or you were just?
I just had a comment. Not a question.
Is it a quick comment?
It's a quick comment.
Okay, can you just say?
Yeah. So I'm all for these types of committees being formed. One thing that I just want to say is that as we keep adding committees, I see us stretching this group and this pool of of applicants thinner and thinner. We already have a lot of committees that don't meet very often, can't meet quorum. That maybe in the future, with the addition of more and more committees, we start looking at perhaps growing the board to be able to share this workload even more effective.
Great. So at this point, there's no one else. So all those in favor, please rate. Oh, does anyone want it reread? Sorry, before we vote, or everyone's good? Layla? Sorry.
No, it's just that I was going to type it up, but then I participated in the discussion too much.
Oh, okay.
If you just give me like 30 seconds,
Yeah,
I
if we
can
can
write
just
it.
wait and we'll see written copy. It's always good.
Yeah, I'll just send it to you, but I'll read it as well. Whereas many issues pertaining to gendered violence have arisen in past months, whereas these conversations will be ongoing and will concern many members, be it resolved that an ad hoc committee be struck to address gender advocacy until the end of the current mandate, be it further resolved that that it be recommended that this committee be struck again at the start of a new mandate and to be voted on as a referendum question in order to become a standing committee.
Thank you. I'm trying to copy paste it, but it doesn't want.
Oh, Facebook is really hard to copy paste from.
That explains a lot. Is everyone okay with the wording, or you want to see it? Okay, perfect. All right. So all those in favor of the motion as written by Layla, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 0. All right, that works. Is there anything else to be discussed? Yes, Layla?
Yes, I realize this probably should have come under appointments, but now that this committee exists, it would be great to appoint, I'm going to suggest 2 counselors and 2 executives for the time being, and we can formalize the composition of the committee maybe at the next council meeting, but because there's an upcoming opportunity to have the CSU be represented at the FFQ, it would be important that we're able to submit our request for membership in time, which is the 20th of March. So I would like to suggest that at this time maybe 2 counselors are chosen and 2 executives, and then we can bring in more people or a student at large later on.
Thank you. And procedurally, that's totally fine. When we create committees, we usually appoint right after, so we can't appoint something that doesn't exist yet. All right, so at this point, the floor is open to nominations. If anyone wants to nominate themselves or someone else to sit on the committee. Yes, Michaela?
I'd like to nominate myself.
Okay, do we have a second? Rowan? Okay. Do we have any other nominations? Yes, Sophie? Okay, do we have a second? Joe? Anyone else? Yes, Veronica?
I'd like to nominate Layla as the executive.
Okay, do we have a second? Or do you consent? Sorry, Michaela, you're technically the second. Perfect. Okay, so at this point we have Michaela, Sophie, and Layla. Yes, Kemi? Okay, do we have a second? To be in. And Layla?
I'd like to nominate Veronica for the executive seat.
Okay, do you consent to nomination? Perfect. All right, yes?
Counselors have seats?
I was suggesting 2 and 2.
Okay.
Is it a suggestion or a hard?
Well,
There was nothing specified in the.
I was just going to suggest 2 and 2, and then the committee could meet and decide on what they thought was an appropriate composition, and it could grow from there. The reason I'm suggesting 2 execs is because of some of the issues that Dylan mentioned, and also where we are in the year is just that Veronica and I have potentially more time to dedicate to this, and given the short timeline, I'd like to make sure that nothing is held back by a lack of quorum.
Okay. So we have as proposed nominees Michaela, Sophie, Kemi, Layla, and Veronica. There's no set amount, so the way I see it, we wouldn't have to engage in a ballot for 2. If anyone wants to set a number, that's up to you, but right now there's no composition stated in the motion, so. Rowan?
To appoint all 5.
Okay, do we have a second? Jared? And you're on the speakers list, Dylan, sorry. Rowan, did you want to motivate?
Oh, sorry. I mean, Layla seemed to say that it was like a soft limit, and if there's 3 counselors that are interested in it, then it's better. And there shouldn't have any issues with quorum with 5 people, 3 people's quorum.
Okay. Is there any discussion we had on the omnibus motion to appoint? Okay. So if not, all those in favor, please raise your placard. Oh, sorry. Was that discussion?
Yeah. Could I move to amend that appointment of 5 people to add someone else to it who wants to nominate themselves?
Technically, you can't. Well, it would be changing the spirit of the motion.
Okay.
You can do it after because it's not a hard limit that's set. So yeah, you can't add someone into an omnibus because then it would have to re-vote anyways. But you can do it after. All right. So all those in favor, please raise your placards. 17. All those opposed? 0. And any abstentions? 1, 2. All right. So that carries. All 5 are appointed. And yes, Joe.
Yeah, I'd like to move to nominate myself.
Okay. Do we have a second? Dylan. You want to motivate?
Yeah, sure. I like advocacy. I like all kinds of advocacy, especially when it comes to gendered advocacy and intersectionality. And I think as a queer person that I can bring a lot of perspective to this and help empower lots of other voices.
All right, thank you. Is there any discussion to be had? All right, so if not, we can move to a vote. All those in favor of appointing Joe to the Gender Advocacy Committee, yes, this was called, please raise your placards. 18. All those opposed? 0. Reem, is that in opposition? No. 0. And any abstentions? 1, 2.
Noted, please.
Perfect. So that carries. Is there any more discussion we had on Gender Advocacy Committee? Yes, Dylan?
I'd like to motion that 3 spots be open for students at large to be added to the board, to the committee, excuse me.
Do you have a second? Sorry, Kenny. Your motivation, Dylan?
The reason why I think that there are a lot of students who would like to partake in this and aid the cause moving it forward. The reason for 3 specifically is that then there are 9 members, which is an odd number. So in case of there being anything that has to be voted on, there's less likely to have a tie.
Great. Yes, Sophie?
I realize I resent.
I could suggest that the addition of the students at large not be counted towards quorum until after a certain date, just because for the amount of time that we have to have the position posted for students to apply, as well as for the appointments committee to select someone, that would mean that we wouldn't be able to make any decisions, which would affect the upcoming deadline. So I'm fully for people participating. Just want to make sure that it doesn't wind up impeding us.
It wouldn't, because quorum's only based on the number of people on the committee. So before they're appointed, they're not on the committee, so the number doesn't count towards
just
quorum.
the 3 seats wouldn't
Yeah.
be like, okay.
So whether there's 3 seats open or 10 seats open or 20 seats open, it's just the 5 people on the committee that count. So it's,
okay,
yeah, great. No amendment necessary? Okay, perfect. All right, is there any more discussion to be had on the prospective addition of 3, not community members, students at large? Yes, Sophie?
Is it possible that we amend it to make the students at large people of color, like priority given people of color? Because I think that right now has a very white committee for advocacy, and it might be
Not, we can move to a vote. So all those in favor of the motion as amended, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 1, 2, 3. Perfect. So that carries. Is there any more discussion on Gender Advocacy Committee? Okay, so if not, we can move into new business informational, beginning with A, gifts, and I don't remember who, yes, Devin, sorry.
So last Friday, 2 people from LaserQuest approached me, and they offered the executive team a free LaserQuest event. Yeah, they said that there was no catch, and I was like, okay, so I'll pass this around so everyone can take a look at it. And yeah, I have the email right here. So LaserQuest party means it's a great time and is hassle-free for organizers, and it's multi-level, 36 players in each game. So it's completely free. We don't even have to advertise for them. And also, they also said, further to your executive team, we would like to offer the executive of various associations of Concordia to join together for an event here as well, perhaps 2 representatives of each, as well. As a student at Concordia too, I think it would be a great opportunity for everyone to get together and discuss their association. So I just wanted to bring this up to council so everybody knows that we were offered this.
Thank you. Veronica?
Also, as per our gift policy, we have to report it in our reports. We unfortunately forgot that little part of the policy, so I guess I apologize on the executive behalf.
Thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, I was just like, why you were offered this? And like, why are we not invited?
Or Veronica or Devin?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, he just came up to me and offered the gift. I don't know why I asked. He said he thought it would be nice for the executives of the student unions to do that. He also offered it for other associations too, as a great opportunity for everyone to get together and discuss their associations. So that's the only reason I can actually think of, because there's no catch and we don't have to advertise. Yeah.
Thank you. Dylan?
Just to confirm, so you were like in the office, and you came in, or you were on the street, or you were laser questing, like.
Laser questing.
Okay, everyone, order, please.
So I came into the office, you know where the lobby is, and then the receptionist approached me saying that 2 people from LaserQuest were at the reception and wanted to talk to one of the executives, and that's where the exchange happened. And that's all I can say to that.
Great. Are there any more questions or discussion on the gifts point? Okay, so if not, yes, Rowan?
Can someone clarify, according to the motion that was passed, I don't believe council actually needs to accept the gift, but can someone confirm that?
Yes, Veronica.
Council has to accept that.
Yes, Ron?
I move to allow the executives to accept the gift.
Second, Jared. Your motivation?
I mean, no harm looking at it, you know.
Okay. Is there any more discussion? Yes, Dylan?
You should be reaching out to the other possible groups so that more people can partake in laser questing.
Yes, Devin?
Yes, I will, because this is what the person offered, and it's only fair that everyone has the same opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if there is no further discussion, we can move to a vote. So all those in favor, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 1. Noted. Thank you. Okay, so we will move on to, 2, my apologies. Yep. So we can move on to 8B, and then since Councillor Rory has graced us with his presence, we will move on to C after. Executive roles.
I move to table indefinitely.
Okay, do we have a second? Sorry, there's a placard. Eamon? Do you want to motivate?
Changing information that's no longer necessary to
be discussed.
Alright, so all those in favor to table indefinitely, please raise your placards. All those opposed? 0, and any abstentions? 1, 2. There we go. Okay, so we're on substantive C, which is ACSD.
No, it's just informational.
Oh, it was informational. Okay.
Yeah, it was under 8.
Informational, ACSD.
So this is something that I've been working on with within Senate caucus, and it's something that I've mentioned before at council. And I just wanted to bring this up as an informational point and to ask for sort of, I guess, everyone's cooperation and input or feedback. But I've been aggregating complaints and improvement points for ACSD, which is the Access Center for Students with Disabilities, from both students and professors across all the faculties. And I'm trying to set up a meeting with the interim manager because their actual manager, Gordon, is away indefinitely, or I guess unknown. But this is an area that a lot of students have faced frustrations with, and a lot of staff have faced frustrations with. Some of the concerns, at least some that were discussed at caucus, are things like parents and pregnancy isn't currently included in the university's accessibility policy. But what I'm looking for from council is, I'm just one councillor, so if you guys can go back to your respective constituents, ask around, you know, do your, I guess I don't want to use the term flippantly, but do your caucusing with your people, with your constituents, ask for input. I've asked from JMSB, I've asked from ASFA, and basically say, look, if you're a student who's registered with this department and you have complaints or you have concerns, let me know. And then if I can get that sort of from you guys, then when I meet with Anna, I can bring it forward with more of a sort of collective approach. Part of the reason why I'm doing this is that it's a project I've been working on for a while, and it's something that I just want to get done versus like bringing it formally through Senate. These things can be as small as like professors say they don't have enough communication with ACSD, they don't know what issues students are facing, sometimes they don't even know that a student is in their class until the end of the semester. From students it can be things like, you know, the examination rooms in their new offices are at 27 degrees, so people are sweltering. Issues about professors that discriminate based on a disability and that ACSD doesn't help them fight it. I had a couple complaints about things like that, students that brought their concerns forward. ACSD said, sorry, we can't help you, or, you know, sorry, it's not our purview. And the student was basically being discriminated against because of, you know, ableism. So I'm just asking that you guys go and get some more information from me. I'm looking for more input, and I want to make sure that when I meet with them, it's representative of the entire student body and other faculties, so fine arts, you know, faculties I'm not involved in, etc. I'm just asking for everyone's sort of help and assistance on this. So it's just an informational point, but if there's any questions, I guess you can ask now, or you can, you know, find me afterwards.
Patrick?
Because I use the service for that, it's like, I know my teachers know what's going on because they get emailed by the service, but given I know what other people are who use the service, because it could be a lot of people because I don't know how many people use that service, because it's maybe 2 or more, like depends on the classes, because I don't know whether to give relevant information on that, because I know like in my class in general it's only maybe 2 and that's, but it's the only thing they do because we get provide the service from them. That's why.
Just to briefly respond, this is also information, I guess, for everyone if you don't know how ACSD works. In the past couple of years, they've experienced a large growth in the number of students that are registering. Whether that's a change in, you know, social stigma about mental disabilities or mental health problems that can affect your learning. ACSD does more than just schedule students in exams. They also help them get tutors. They help them get, you know, study resources. They help them get classroom accommodations, ergonomic accommodations, all sorts of different things around the university. So it's not just, oh, that's a student who gets a special exam room. You know, I don't see them during exams because they're off somewhere else. So because of this big surge, ACSD hasn't hired any new advisors recently, and like say this semester when some students were asking for tutors, there was a 1.5 month wait before they could get even a response to their request or to their email, because there's one person working on assigning tutors or getting tutors for that department. So yes, they're partially funded by the Quebec government or by the Ministry of Education, but if there are students that are experiencing difficulties like this and it's systemic and there's trends, and there's other students that you guys here are having issues like that, those are things that I need to bring forward so we can say, more than just, the 3 students that have said it to me, hey, students have an issue with the backlog, students need this, this, and this fixed. So it's just that even if you're not involved in that, you don't need that service, ask students about it, see who you can, reach out to. And reach out to your profs too, because they have very different experiences than students do. And I was really surprised to hear from them.
Thank you. Yes, Ahmed?
Just a question, like, if we need this information like within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or can we delay it like by 1 month? Maybe you can ask the researcher to work on it, get more information, maybe launching a survey, collecting more information. So I just want to know, is it urgent or it can wait?
Is there any more discussion or any more questions for Rory? Yes, Dylan?
I know that the university over the past couple of years have been running deficits. Do you think that perhaps budget cuts and things of that nature have hindered the ability to aid these students?
My personal opinion, both sitting on the Senate Finance Committee, which is the next agenda point, and from being a student registered with that office, is that that's an to speak really bluntly, it's an absolute bullshit excuse. This school makes money on all sorts of other services. For example, as I will mention later, they make a huge profit on parking, but yet they have refused on 3 occasions to add more accessible parking spots. People parking in those spots still pay for parking. It's not an issue of we don't have the money. Take spots from somewhere else. Like it's not a money issue. The other thing is that for every student registered who's proven with whatever medical documentation that they deserve to be registered, the Ministry of Education matches their funding. So when you request a tutor through ACSD, it's not Concordia that's footing the cost of that bill, it's the Ministry of Education. It's just Concordia that's paying the tutor and then submitting that to Quebec to say another student has needed X, Y, and Z services. I know that there are some students that get bursaries and other financial assistance through AFE or MERS, but it's through that same office. It's not like it's an added service. And again, let's not forget, the school bills us services fees that come under that umbrella of Dean of Students, health services, etc., that covers ACSD. So it should not be an issue of funding.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or discussion? Yes, Dylan.
I understand that it should not be an issue. I'm curious, but have they been reducing their funding? Is there a bit of a funding play coming into effect?
Other than my current answer, I don't think I could give you a specific response with any certainty.
Thank you. Yes, Ahmed?
Yeah, I have a question. Is it like a lack of services or funding, just to be on the same page?
If I give my personal opinion from the feedback I've gotten from professors and from students, part of the issue is I think that there's a responsibility gap between the policy. So Concordia's accessibility policy says one thing. It says that the school must accommodate reasonable, etc. It says that everyone is responsible for it, not just the office of ACSD, that every faculty member, every staff, every dean, etc. is responsible. Students are responsible for X, Y, and Z. But that doesn't actually get implemented. So students will complain that they're not getting the accommodations they need. They'll go to their prof. Their prof will say, I don't know whether I can help you. I don't know what I can do, or I just can't do that. And students will then go to ACSD, and ACSD will say, well, you've talked to the prof says no, there's not much else we can do. One of the main issues is that people get different answers from different sources. So one advisor at ACSD might be very helpful, and another advisor might not be. So there's lack of consistency across the board when one advisor says, sorry, I can't talk to your profs on your behalf, I can't advocate for you, and the other advisors can. profs are concerned about that lack of communication where they can't go back to the advisors and say, like, can you explain this to me? What do I need to know about this student? There was a prof that had a student who had epilepsy in their class and didn't even know until the student had an episode in the classroom. And the prof was like, I don't know what's going on. Is this an allergic reaction? Is this a stroke, etc.? Like, there's sort of a problem with privacy, but also like enough disclosure for them to help. I personally think.
Thank you. Is there anything further on the point of ACSD? Okay, so if anyone has any questions or anything to mention for your point person on this. Perfect. So 8D, yours again.
Not to take more speaking time than I deserve, but I hope everyone has noticed I posted in the CSU group about a week, maybe 2 weeks ago, back in February, about the university's financial statements that they published. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to go through them or not, but sitting on Senate Finance, I had some serious concerns about the profits that the university is making off of certain things, and I just wanted to bring it up specifically at council to see what everyone else's thoughts were, to see if we should be taking some stances on these things, to see if we should be, mandating some change, mandating people to work on change, propose things, if there's stances we want to take. Part of my concern is the profits that are made on the services or things that students have to bear that are extra, so parking, residence fees, the bookstore, things like that. University makes a big profit on this, and then they funnel that profit back into their operating budget, which can be used on anything else, like professor salaries. So if they're having a difficulty paying professors, they shouldn't be taking it out on students paying for residence, is I guess one of my points. I posted some of my takeaways on the group. I don't know if anyone had a chance to review that, but the statements are actually really easy to read if you go through, and in the notes to the statements it explains some of these, some of the things that are happening. So I just wanted to bring this up as an informational point and maybe have a discussion about it, because I think as council, this is something that we should take very seriously and that we should regularly review the university statements and go through our position or our opinion on it.
Okay, thank you. Awatif, Ali, and then Rowan. Okay, Ali?
So, I am 100% with this. I think that we should always review what the university is spending on and what they're taking money, where they're taking money from, especially when it affects students and in regards to residences and the amount of money they make out of residences. And as an international student who has worked on the tuition hikes campaign, I know very well that above 40% of international students are suffering with paying residence fees while they're in Canada, and the university doubling their profit or making double what they spend on students for something like that is, to me, absolutely ridiculous and just doesn't make any sense. And what's even more annoying is we have no clue where that money is going to. It just disappears on the budget. Don't know whether it's going to an operations or whether it's going anywhere. It just disappears.
Thank you. Rowan and then Ward.
Yeah, I want to thank Roy for bringing this up. I think it's very important that we discuss it here, and I think to answer one of their questions, I think it's absolutely appropriate that council takes stances on issues that we find within the university's finances. It's absolutely appropriate that we pick out the issues and grill them on it at Senate as well as anywhere else possible. I honestly forgot to read them, I meant to, but I was wondering if Rory or even someone else who has gone through them, one thing I know happened last year was that it was through discussions of this sort that we saw the university planning to increase international tuition hikes, or increase international tuition. I was wondering if there's anything or any information leading towards those kinds of conclusions that I might see.
I didn't notice anything that would, these are not the budgets, so these don't include forecasted revenues, or we think we're going to pull in this amount of money from these types of students versus those types of students. This is as of fiscal year. So last year, this is what the accounts are at. So what we made, what we spent it on, our balance sheet, things like that. There are some interesting things, like they reissued a note a couple of years ago to buy buildings, to buy infrastructure, and it's coming up for refinancing soon. So it's like, where are they going to get $200 million from type of question. I don't think there's anything glaring in here, but if I can maybe segue into my speaking turn.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've discussed with ASMA, or the Academic and Advocacy Coordinator, when I brought this up at caucus, was that these statements are, like, they're hard to read. They're hard to read for an average student. Like, I'm not an accounting major. I know there's some members on council who are. I'm a finance major, and I'm a JMSB, but it's still somewhat difficult to read through and kind of understand, what does this number mean in the context of I'm a student? What is the university doing with $34 million? Part of what we discussed was proposing hiring someone to run some public student workshops, almost like the budget conversations that Concordia gives, but done by the CSU on these documents, and sort of have like a financial literacy spin to it. So say, how can we convert these documents where they're hiding all sorts of information, like they're hiding the profit they're making off of parking or other services, or they're hiding how much money they're spending on administrative salaries, like the provost offices and things like that. How can we translate that into an easy to read format for any everyday student in any faculty to be like, oh, I know the school is making $3.1 million off of residences. I know that every student paying residency fees is paying 200% too much. So that's one of the proposals that we discussed, is hiring someone to reformat these statements in a way that either council or that an average student could read, and then doing like a, I don't want to say like a town hall, but like a bandwagon of going between the faculties, setting up some consultations, some presentations, and having this person communicate to the student body what the university is spending their money on. And I think that's a duty that we have as a student union, is to help the students understand what their school is spending their money on, where it's going, how it's being used. And if they don't have the capacity to do so because they're not a business student or they're not an accounting major, then we should be able to provide them with enough tools that they can have that rudimentary understanding. So that was sort of a proposal for financial literacy. I think there's probably a budget that needs to be attached to that in order to hire someone to do it. But this was sort of an idea that was thrown out there at caucus, and I'm throwing it back out to council to see if anyone has input on that, or if they want to make any specific proposals.
Thank you. Dylan?
I was curious at whether you would be open to tabling this topic to next council. That way it would appear, everyone be aware that it would be a topic of conversation. Everyone could read through the statements beforehand. I didn't see it on the agenda, so I haven't read it recently. I think then we can have an even more informed discussion, and then bring up those ideas of hiring someone, which I think would be a great point.
Yes, if I can respond. I just added these 2 points, ACSD and the financial statements, to the agenda, just like informational things. If no one has read the documents, or people want to think about this stuff, by all means, yes, let's discuss it next time. But I wanted to bring it up to have on everyone's radar. Do think about it for next time, and then maybe we can have an informed discussion about what is our, as a union's, stance or position on the university's spending. And then if you guys have any questions in the meantime, I have Senate Finance Committee in a week, 2 weeks or so. If you send them to me, I can ask, I can probe, I can find this information. If I can maybe call out, Layla has already, Layla's looking for specific information on something, and it's like, if you guys want specific information on things, I can ask the right people in the right offices for that information, and then we can discuss it, we can bring it back.
Thank you. So if everyone's all put it on the agenda for next meeting? Okay. All right. Is there any more discussion or questions regarding university financial statements? Okay, so if not, it'll show up in April as well. That being said, there was one motion that did not make it onto the agenda. And it was brought to my attention halfway through council, so instead of breaking Robert's rules, can we all consent to it being on the agenda? I looked at it and it's not contentious. So, Devin?
So, whereas the deadline for the food systems project funding has passed, I motion to extend the deadline to March 28th, 2018.
From?
From the last Friday of February.
Thank you. Do you have a second? Joe, your motivation?
Yes, so I hadn't thoroughly read all of the annexes for sustainability and missed the deadline for the food systems funding, and it's only fair that all of the student groups have the opportunity for their projects.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion? Okay, so if not, we can move to a vote. So all those in favor of extending the deadline, please raise your placards. Three. All those opposed? 0. And any abstentions? 1. Right, so that carries, and we're in question period and business arising. Yes, Layla?
Given that that there was a motion about an apology to FASA and that it has to be signed by council, I took the liberty to draft one really quick so that we can sign off on it right away. So I just posted it on the Facebook group, but I'll read it out. To FASA students, it has come to our attention that a large number of posters were removed from the bulletin boards in the VA building and thrown away. These boards were then filled with many posters advertising the upcoming CSU elections. We recognize that the removal of these posters has had a large impact on the fine arts community, including recipients of the special project grants and the Art Matters Festival. The destruction of these posters is extremely disrespectful to both the level of work and time students put into creating and marketing their events and promotional materials. We sincerely apologize for the harm these actions have had on your work and your projects and recognize the message this sends to students. The CSU values the fine arts community and recognizes their frustrations with the actions of this year's CEO and their electoral team. We would like to extend our apologies to any student who was affected by the removal of these posters. In recognition of these concerns and the fact that these issues are not isolated to this year, the CSU has allocated at FASA's request $5,000 to the special project grants and $5,000 to the Art Matters Festival. The CSU will be working on implementing a new poster policy for future CEOs to follow in order to prevent this from occurring in the future. Sincerely, CSU Council of Representatives, and then we would also have the CEO sign on to this as requested in the apology.
Thank you. Rory and then Roy.
I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but can we change like posters to something more general like art? Because it might be that some of these students, like poster might, I don't know, carry a connotation of, you know, something like, oh, they just tore down a poster. It's more flippant. And I don't know if, like, to some of these students, this might have been more than just a poster. And if we're acknowledging and respecting, like, I think the whole intent of this is that we're apologizing for tearing down their hard work. So I don't know if maybe it's more appropriate to put, like, their art or their art projects or your art. I don't know what the word would be if someone can help me out, but can we replace poster?
Or did you have it?
I think maybe not replace posters, but write poster and art.
Sure.
Yeah, there's no motion on the table, so you don't have to move to amend, but I'm sure, Layla, you're open to suggestions for any.
Totally. Just, I think part of the reason it's important to say poster is just because if they weren't in line with the university poster policy, then they wouldn't have been allowed to be up on those boards in the first place. But I think
Just
that
for
adding
perception.
art.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Roy?
I move to accept this. I move to accept the apology.
Okay, Joe, second. Do you want to please? Sorry.
It's not actually accepting the apology, it's signing on to the
Signing.
apology.
I think that'll include the posters and art comment that was brought up by several counselors. We've already gone through this discussion. So.
Okay, so is there any further discussion? Okay, so if not, we move to a vote. So all those in favor of signing off, please raise your placards. All those opposed? Yep. Yeah, it's a show. Yeah. And any abstentions? 1. All right. Oh no, sorry. Okay. Okay, so I have Veronica still on the speakers list.
Oh no, just
okay. Reem?
My name's on speakers list?
Sorry.
It's my
Yeah, it's your speakers list. Sorry.
Okay. So I have a question regarding the number of seats for ENCA students on council for next year. So I noticed in the election posters it says that we have 4 seats versus 5 seats this year. And I reached out to some execs, I reached out to the CEO, and the only answer that I received is that it's based on the number of students in the faculty. And I tried to check online from university resources, and I didn't see a drop in the number of ENCS students. So I'm basically bringing this here because I need some help, like direction towards who's the person who's gonna give me the answer for this issue.
The person who gave you the answer is Omar to that issue, and
The general coordinator?
the general coordinator, because I've discussed this with him previously, so they would know the ins and outs and how the calculations were done.
So I can get, he has a documentation for the number of students enrolled in ENCS this year versus last year.
I mean, I can't, the dean of students gives the information to the executive. I cannot guarantee what documents Omar does or does not have, but they would be the one to answer the question, unless anyone else has a more coherent answer. Veronica?
Can you maybe repeat your question?
How were the numbers calculated?
For
The number of seats. Is there anything else? Yes, I would say.
Yeah, I just want to add, I also emailed the CEO, and he said it's because there's a drop in the number of students in the faculty.
Thank you. Okay, is there any more questions or business arising before we move on to announcements? Okay. Just before we start announcements, this is not a reflection on anyone here, but just things I've seen in past years, because I know we're all mature and wonderful people. Announcements in the March meeting are not the time to hawk your campaign promises and etc. But I'm sure we all already knew that. All right, so that being said, Gabby.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a quick reminder of a couple of events that we're going to have that I won't have the chance to announce until next council meeting. So we're going to have 3 series of rap battles for social justice workshops at the Hive Loyola. The first one is this Friday, and the topic is police brutality. So you're all more than welcome, and if you know anyone that would be interested in attending, please do so. We also have a Quidditch tournament for charity happening on April 10th. There are only 44 spots given the rules of the game, so if you know of anyone that is interested in signing up, the posters will be going out next week and promotion as well.
Thank you.
No.
Ahmed?
There's many events that are taking place this month. I will have time to mention them all, but please check them on the Facebook page. Invite your friend. There is consultation, there is workshops, and yeah, please just invite everyone and please spread the word.
Thank you. Yes, Kevin?
The CSU Housing Committee will also be holding an event tomorrow in the LB from 11 to 5, and I posted it on the Facebook page.
Thank you very much.
There's the debate tomorrow at 6:30 in the CSU Large Lounge. Please come all.
Thank you. Anything further? Yes, Layla?
The special project funding deadline is March 23rd at midnight. The application's on the CSU website. If you know anyone who has a project that they want to get funded for, we've opened up the guidelines a little bit, so it now includes things like conferences and competitions, and you don't have to apply for 50% of your budget. You can apply for up to $1,000 regardless of what your budget is. Please apply. It's the last opportunity for funding, and it's a really great opportunity.
Thank you. Devin?
No, it's okay.
All right. Yes, Mustafa?
Okay, guys, so on Monday, SPHR has vegan Palestinian food at People's Potato. It's Israeli Apartheid Week, and we always open our week-long events with People's Potato vegan Palestinian food. So if you're hungry on Monday, please go to People's Potato. Wednesday of the same week, we have a workshop on pinkwashing. We're trying to make it bilingual. If you don't know what pinkwashing is, that's good. That's why you need to come on Wednesday, so you know what pinkwashing is. And then on Friday, we will be having a movie screening, and it's going to be at MB 210, like downstairs.
Where's the movie screening?
Yeah, that's it. Sorry?
Where's the movie screening?
Wednesday, it's going to be 6:30. It's at the Hive. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Emily.
I think I saw another placard around here. Yes, Eamon?
The debate tomorrow is going to be nice. If you want to blow that off instead and come to the annual demo against police brutality that's happening at 7. Lexi, where is that? My internet gave up.
It's a contingency.
La Fontaine?
La Fontaine, yeah.
Come early and get donuts from Food Against Fascism.
Yeah, do that. Pull them in the debate.
Thank you, Veronica.
There's also a second debate next week at Loyola, so if you really want to go to that demo, you can. It will also probably be live streamed, so you can catch it online.
Thank you. Layla?
The CSU Housing Co-op is hosting an event in partnership with Changer tomorrow in the library. There's going to be free popcorn and a photo booth. It's a carnival about co-ops that's happening in collaboration with Changer, who's doing events about co-ops all over the city. It's going to be really fun, and library lobby from 11 to 5. So please stop by for free food.
Thank you. Devin?
Also, I forgot. Please don't forget that everything you ate off of goes into the compost bin. Last time at our meeting, stuff was still in the recycling or garbage, so it goes into the orange diamond lid over there. And yeah.
Thank you. Joe?
I move to adjourn.
Okay, is it an announcement, Tammy?
No, I moved to adjourn.
Okay, yes, meeting adjourned. Thank you.